Okay, hi there guys, how you doing? Well, there's a problem. Huh. Well, for starters, I'm gonna shrinky-dink you down. And for other starters, I'm gonna figure out why the heck! Okay, there it is. Elgato, why you know show? You goof? Are you trying to be a ghost? You're trying to scare me? Well, guess what? It's not gonna work. I drank 6 cups of coffee. I'm unscarable. Maybe. There we go! Except now I'm gone. Boop. Haha. You thought I could be thwarted by your silly schemes, you. I'm actually gonna shrink me down. Hang on. Here we go. Ooh. Oh no, trick-or-treaters had to come right this second. Are you for realsies? Apparently they're for realsies. Oh no. Oh no. Hello? Okay. Okay. Hang on. I gotta go get trick-or-treaters. Joy. This might be a problem. I didn't expect to have trick-or-treaters. Okay, so today, what we're gonna be doing is I've actually got homework to do. Like homeworks. Yay. So, what I have to do, and I've already conveniently censored everything, because this was a nude model, but I was like, I don't really want to bother with that. So, I censored everything. But, we're going to turn this into a statue. Now, I've already done that with the fan, but I have to turn the whole body into a statue, and it's going to be fun. And yeah, that's basically what I'm going to do with my time today. So I'm not going to be talking a lot. Basically, you're not going to hear a peep out of me. What you will be listening to, instead, are some spooky, scary stories concerning folklore and history. Courtesy of the Lore Podcast. If you want to check that out, there's a link in the description down below. It's a very good podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts. So, yeah. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and just get started.
Before we get started today, I have 2 things I want to pass along. First, the final book in the World of Lore trilogy, Dreadful Places, comes out tomorrow, October 9th. The first week of book sales is incredibly important for the success of a book launch, so if you've been waiting to order your copy, today's the day to do it. Learn more over at theworldoflore.com/dreadfulplaces. Second, the brand new Lore Shop is open for business. I've partnered with the folks over at Cotton Bureau to create new shirts and a better shopping experience, and there's so much goodness waiting over there for you. Get all your spooky lore things over at lorepodcast.com/shop. And that's it. And now, on with the show. Two centuries ago, the county prison in Gloucester, England, installed a treadmill. It wasn't for exercise, though. In an era when many of the inmates there had been sentenced to hard labor, authorities had been finding it very difficult to deliver on that promise. That is, until January of 1823. That was the year a man named William Cubitt got involved. He came from a long line of millers, people who understood better than most how to build machines that ran continuously on the power of water or wind. In Gloucester, though, he was tasked with tapping into a different source of energy: the prisoners. When it opened, the Gloucester prison treadmill had enough room for 36 men at a time. They would step onto the wooden slats and do a sort of walk mixed with climbing. The power they generated wasn't wasted either. In Gloucester, it was harnessed to grind corn, but in other prisons who adopted the same form of punishment, it sometimes pumped water. Many, though, did nothing at all, so they called it grinding the wind. For as odd as that punishment sounds, it was actually pretty mild compared to a lot of methods used over the centuries. In medieval times, they used the picket, where a criminal would be hung by their thumb or wrist with a sharp spike beneath their foot. Deciding between standing on the painful spike or hanging from just their thumb created a painful dilemma for those subjected to the picket. Fans of the Game of Thrones might recognize rat torture, another real punishment pulled right out of darker times. Criminals would have a bucket strapped to their chest with a rat inside. When the bucket was set on fire, the rat would attempt to dig and chew its way out. I'll leave the rest of that process to your imagination. Punishment today almost feels like a walk in the park compared to the past, doesn't it? At the core of it all, though, is the propensity for humans to punish the criminals among us. We've spent thousands of years creating laws and expectations that guide human behavior and have placed punishment around it all like a pit filled with snakes. And for the most part, it's worked. Today we trust that the justice system will help us find the truly guilty and deliver a just punishment for their crimes. But when long years of imprisonment, hard labor, and even painful or deadly consequences await those who pass through the halls of justice, it's reason enough to take pause and wonder, to ask ourselves the question that might be infinitely more frightening than treadmills or angry rats. Justice might have run its course, but what if we got it wrong? I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. Folks didn't think too highly of Russell. Some of it was based on his personal qualities. He was known to be feeble-minded and weak of intellect among the people of Manchester, Vermont. But he was also lazy, and in an age when everyone needed to work to keep their families alive, that was viewed as a character flaw. Russell had this tendency to go for long walks in the middle of the workday. Sometimes those walks would last many days, and the people of his community would begin to wonder where he'd gone, only to have him stroll back into town, happy as a clam, ready to pick up where he left off. In a town where there was always a field to work or repairs to make to the barn, Russell wasn't respected much. And he somehow married a woman just like himself. Sally came from a local family, the Bournes, and was one of 5 grown children. But while her 4 siblings all worked hard and toiled in the expected way, Sally had taken on a bit of her husband Russell's personality. She, like Russell, would go on walks of her own, although never for quite as long. She also seemed to always be pregnant. She and Russell had married in 1794, and by 1812 they'd had 6 children. For a long while, they had all lived with Russell's parents. But when Russell's father walked out in 1801 and never returned, they lost the farm and had to go elsewhere. Russell's mother was cared for by the town, but he and his growing family ended up knocking on the door of Sally's own family, and they took them in. By 1812, they'd been living with the Bournes for over a decade. That was a long time for Sally's brothers, Stephen and Jesse, to watch Russell fail to carry his own weight. Over 10 seasons of hard work in the fields, while Russell took long naps or disappeared for a week at a time into the woods on one of his unannounced walkabouts. And I don't think I'm projecting when I say that it would have been incredibly frustrating to everyone else. On May 12th of 1812, the family tension reached a boiling point. It was one of those rare days when Russell was actually out in the field with Stephen and Jesse, along with Russell's 10-year-old son, Lewis. They were clearing stones from the rocky New England soil, perhaps to get a piece of new land ready for crops. A neighbor named Thomas Johnson happened to be walking by and claimed that he saw the three men arguing. Being a polite man, he turned a blind eye and continued to his own house, where he stepped inside. But the tension that had been in the air didn't sit well with him, so he came back out a while later to check on them. Peace seemed to have returned, and the three men, along with the boy Lewis, were still out in the field, hard at work clearing away the countless stones in the soil. Satisfied that nothing bad had happened, Johnson went back inside. And I mentioned him not just because he was a witness to the argument, but also because of something else. Thomas Johnson was one of the last people to see Russell Colvin alive. Many years later, Russell's son Lewis would explain what happened that day. According to him, his uncles Stephen and Jesse continuously attacked his father for a variety of reasons. He was lazy. He spent too much time at the tavern. He wasn't a responsible father. On and on they went, and as they did, the tensions rose with them. That's when Russell lashed out. Lewis claimed that his father used a small riding stick to take a swing at Stephen, who returned the favor with a hard blow from a wooden club. Russell fell to the ground, but immediately stood back up and launched another attack on Stephen, who swung his club even harder the second time, knocking him back down. This time, Russell didn't get up. Lewis ran to his father's side and shook him, but the man was unmoving and silent. There was no blood, but to a 10-year-old boy, I doubt that mattered. Frightened by what had happened, and perhaps to escape his uncle Stephen, Lewis bolted for the house and vanished inside. The following day, according to Lewis, his uncle Stephen cornered him with an angry expression on his face. Russell had run off on another of his long, unannounced walks, he told him. This one, though, was probably the result of the fight they'd had the day before, and Stephen felt guilty about that. He threatened to beat Lewis to death if he told anyone about it, and so the boy remained silent. It would be 7 years before anyone was ready to put the pieces together and ask the burning question that had been on everyone's mind. Where in the world was Russell Colvin? I said it took 7 years before they started looking for answers, but in reality, people were wondering from the moment he vanished. They always wondered when it came to Russell. Seeing as how his own father had walked out on the family back in 1801, it wouldn't be a stretch to expect Russell to do the same. So every time he walked off and didn't come home for dinner, people wondered. Except this time he didn't return with that innocent grin on his face, as if nothing had happened. He just didn't return, period. Maybe they held out hope, or perhaps they wrote him off as long gone and never coming back. The fight could very well have frightened him away, after all, triggering whatever it was inside him that loved to escape the world. The years that followed were filled with some unusual experiences, though. No, this isn't where I tell you that his ghost haunted the farm, and how Stephen or Jesse or Sally's parents weren't able to sleep due to all the wrappings and levitating objects. Those things never happened. But other things did. In the spring of 1813, the barn on the Bourne family farm burned to the ground. No one was ever able to figure out how the fire started, so it was all chalked up to an act of God, and eventually cleaned up and rebuilt. 2 years later, in the spring of 1815, Sally vanished on one of her Russell-like excursions and returned many days later. When she reappeared, she was pregnant again. And of course, that created a few problems. First, knowing Russell had been gone for 3 years at that point, someone else had to be the father of the child. Even Sally herself admitted to that. The trouble was, she had no legal standing for receiving financial help from him. At the time, Vermont law stated that only an unmarried woman could do that, and since Russell had only vanished, Sally was still technically married to him. So she went to her brothers, Stephen and Jesse, to ask for help. Stephen, true to his hot-headed nature, was angry with his sister, but he also delivered a startling revelation to her. She was free and clear to request financial support from the baby's father, because Russell was long dead. He knew it personally to be a fact. That little detail was certainly informative, but it most likely got lost in the chaos of the coming months. In the summer of 1815, that polite neighbor of theirs, Thomas Johnson, ended up buying the Bourne farm to extend his own land. Sally, her parents, and all her kids ended up finding a different place in Manchester to live, but Stephen saw the sale of the farm as his chance to move on to new adventures, and he moved west to upstate New York, near the shores of Lake Ontario. In the spring of 1816, Johnson's children were out exploring their new land when they found something interesting. When they handed it to their father, he immediately recognized it. It was the hat Russell Colvin had been wearing on the day he'd seen the argument in the field back in 1812. It was odd, but not odd enough for him to say anything about it to anyone else, it seems. Then something truly unusual happened. Sometime in 1819, Sally's Uncle Amos paid her a visit. He seemed visibly upset, as if something disturbing had happened to him. When she asked about it, Amos told her about the dream he'd had the night before. In it, her lost husband Russell had reappeared beside his bed and told him that he'd been murdered. He even named the killers, too, her own brothers, Stephen and Jesse. But the vision of Russell did more than that. He told Amos that the proof of the crime was in the cellar beneath the old Bourne house. Right away, the authorities were brought in to examine the cellar. After sifting through the dirt floor, they discovered a few items of interest: a penknife, a button, and a few small bones. And while the bones could have belonged to any number of animals, the penknife was a dead giveaway. No pun intended, I promise, because the knife belonged to Russell. Almost immediately, warrants for the arrest of both brothers were issued, but because Stephen had moved away, only Jesse was brought in by the authorities. Despite having very little physical evidence, he was thrown in a jail cell to await his trial, and that's where he met a career criminal named Silas Merrill and told the stranger his own version of the events. According to Merrill, Jesse confirmed that there had been a fight that day back in the field in 1812. After Lewis had run inside, the Bourne patriarch Barney came out to see what had happened and discovered Stephen and Jesse standing over Russell's body. The older man asked if his son-in-law was dead, but
I'm just
Stephen
pretty
shook his
sure.
head. Barney seemed rather disappointed at that news. Jesse claims that they helped the old man carry Russell's unconscious body to the cellar.
No, the
where he
problem
told them to
is
cut the
making a
man's throat using
seamless
his own
brush texture
Then, they
is
hid the
annoying
corpse in the barn where the
at
sheep
best,
were kept. After a
because
few months,
sometimes
they
you have
purposely burned
to make a
down the
seamless
barn to destroy the
texture.
body, and then move the remains
You have
to an old
to
tree stump on the property.
basically make sure no hard edges
Silas
are
Merrill was
around.
set free in exchange for sharing the story with the authorities, but Jesse was left to clean
And
up
I
the
didn't
mess.
notice on my
He denied it all,
computer
and
that
instead claimed
I
that
could
Stephen
see
had
on my
acted
monitor.
alone,
I can see it,
clubbing Russell to
but
death
there was
and
a
then moving
very,
the body
very
to the cellar
light
for a time.
box effect
Maybe
on the
Jesse
brush.
thought this was his
So
ticket to freedom.
and trying to redo it.
Maybe he thought that because Stephen had moved away and was out of reach, it was better to blame him than take the fall himself. If they couldn't locate the true killer, surely Jesse would get to go free. But that's not how it played out. Soon enough, Stephen was in custody as well, and he denied all of the accusations.
I just goofed.
Neither of them had killed Russell Colvin, and he would swear to it in court if he had to. The court, to their credit, was more than happy to give him that chance. But there were other things on the horizon that no one could have planned for. Everything was about to fall apart, and in the most spectacular way possible.
No, you can change that in Photoshop. There's a brush options I can make it work.
The people of Manchester, Vermont had had 7 years to fantasize about what had happened to Russell Colvin. That's a long time, and as you can imagine, they'd become rather creative in their assumptions. But that's the thing. Assumptions are a house of cards, and if the wind blows just right, it will all come crashing down. The first winds blew into the courtroom in October of 1819. That was when a number of significant testimonies were given by witnesses on the stand. Stephen, Jesse, and Sally had another brother, William Bourne, and he stood before the courtroom and told everyone about how Stephen had once told him he wished Russell was dead. Russell's son Lewis, now 17 years old at this point, also testified, as did former neighbor Thomas Johnson. Even Sally had a chance to speak, bringing back up that conversation she'd had with Stephen 4 years prior about the father of the baby and how he was certain Russell was dead. There were others, too. All of them took the stand and reported on the character of Stephen Bourne and on the history he had of violence and threats toward Russell. One of those witnesses was a lawyer named William Wyman, who claimed that Stephen had come to him for legal advice in 1801, wondering if he and his brother really had to take Sally, Russell, and their kids into their home. In the process, he swore an oath that if no one else would stop it, he would personally do it himself. The jury left the courtroom on October 26th to meet and discuss the case, and when they returned, they brought their verdict with them. Stephen and Jesse Bourne were guilty of murder. They were both sentenced to execution by hanging, but in the days that followed, Jesse's punishment was changed to life in prison. Justice, it seems, had won the day. Or had it? You see, in the lead-up to his date with the hangman in January of 1820, Stephen and his attorney made a strange request.
What just happened?
They wanted to place an advertisement in as many newspapers as possible to see if anyone had seen Russell Colvin alive.
Or did the battery?
These ads informed readers of Stephen's plight and described Russell's physical appearance. I doubt that anyone expected the ads to net any results, so when someone came forward with information, it was a complete shock. Tabor Chadwick was a Methodist minister from Shrewsbury, New Jersey, who had seen an account of the trial in the New York Post. When he reached out to Stephen's attorney, he claimed that he knew of a farmhand in the nearby town of Dover who went by the name of Russell Colvin and spoke often about Vermont. A second man, James Welpley, read about Chadwick's claim and decided to go to Dover, New Jersey to see for himself. Sure enough, he found the farmhand, but when Welpley mentioned the story and court case, the man denied being Russell at all. Not willing to give up so easily, Welpley enlisted the help of a female friend to lure the farmhand onto a train that was headed north to Vermont. Upon arriving in Bennington, Vermont, where the court was located, Welpley managed to deliver the farmhand straight into a packed courtroom. Despite being a completely unrelated trial, there were enough people in the room who knew about the case that a stunned silence descended over the crowd. After that, Welpley sent a telegram to Manchester and told them that he was bringing Russell Colvin back home. When they arrived later that day, a crowd was waiting for them, including a large number of Russell's former neighbors. And all of them smiled in recognition. Russell Colvin had finally come home. The rest of that day was a bit of a blur for everyone, including Russell Colvin. When he was taken to visit Stephen in jail,
Nutterbutter, I hope you saved my work. I'm going to be kind of upset if you didn't.
And asked why he was locked up. Like I mentioned earlier, he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. I feel the need to point out that there were no photographs of Russell to look at or compare, but his children recognized him, as did his neighbors. He even had a pair of scars on his forehead, most likely from that fight in the field back in 1812. so there was no reason to doubt his reappearance for a moment. Soon enough, Russell went to the courthouse to swear he really was who he claimed to be, and as a result, the charges against Stephen and Jesse were dropped. There
Thank
was
goodness
some
I put that on a
conversation
separate
about
layer,
Russell packing up his
I could not
family
undo
and
it.
taking them back to Dover, and that's eventually what they did. He returned to work on the farm where James Whelpley had found him, but that new chapter of his life was short. At the age of just 46 years old, Russell Colvin passed away.
Pretty good.
This time, though, he really was dead. We place so much trust in our justice system, and for the most part, it's well-founded. Setting aside the debates about what constitutes justice or how far punishment should go, there is a beautiful simplicity in the judicial process. When crimes are committed, the evidence needs to be examined, and that informs who is punished and how. But there are no perfect systems, especially ones that involve human beings. We tend to be biased people, and sometimes that bias finds its way into the courtroom. Looking around today, it's easy to find modern examples of times when that's happened. Adnan Syed, the key figure in the first season of the podcast Serial, is one of the most prominent examples, but there are others. Joey Watkins, Freddie Gray, Terrence Lewis, and so many others. All of them are at the center of debates about political bias and imperfect justice. These are all cases where we've had to step back and confront the possibility of wrongful conviction and the devastation it can lead to. Looking back, many historians believe that the imprisonment and planned executions of Stephen and Jesse Bourne represent the first of those missteps in U.S. history. Thankfully, it was corrected before it became too late. I'm certainly not suggesting that every case can be easily resolved, and I'm certainly not placing the blame on any particular people. But the story of Russell Colvin is full of those flaws. I mean, this was a courtroom that allowed a ghostly dream and a handful of character witnesses to act as evidence. It's impossible to hand out precise and comprehensive justice with that kind of bias. Life after the trial was a gift to Stephen and Jesse Bourne. They'd been cleared of all charges and set free to do what they wanted. Stephen, from what I can tell, returned to New York, where he'd been found before the trial. I have a feeling he welcomed slipping back into obscurity. Jesse, though, squandered his new lease on life. He traveled the country and fell in with a bad crowd, eventually becoming part of a gang of counterfeiters based out of Cleveland. In 1860, he was approached by a man named Hackett who had heard about Jesse's work and wanted to join up. Jesse sat down with the man, had a few drinks, and when the alcohol really started to flow, bragged about all his past crimes. Hackett turned out to be a U.S. Marshal, and all of the stories Jesse told him that night landed him in a stretch in prison. Well, most of them. There was one tale that Hackett didn't really know what to do with, but he passed it along to the court nonetheless. You see, after getting suitably drunk, Jesse bragged about an older crime. He and his brother, he said, had murdered someone. He didn't name the victim or provide enough details to nail down where the crime had taken place, but he described it in a way that's left everyone wondering ever since. He and Stephen killed a man, he said, but eventually got caught. To help get them out of jail and to avoid the frightening sentences that had been passed against them, they did something bold and risky. They hired an imposter to pretend to be the victim. And it worked. The story of Russell Colvin's disappearance, death, and resurrection is full of many surprising twists and turns, all of which contribute to the power of the story. But there's one detail, the dream reported by Amos Bourne, that stands out as particularly unusual, and it's not the first time something like that has happened. Stick around after this short sponsor break to hear one more tale of deadly dreams. This episode of Lore was made possible by each and every one of you, and by my brand new podcast, Unobscured. One of the things I've learned over the last few years of making lore is that there are some historical topics that are simply too big for a single podcast episode. They're too complex, too intricate, and too important to only spend 30 minutes on them. That's why I created Unobscured. Each 12-episode season of Unobscured will go deep into a single topic, while also going wide to bring in interviews with historians and experts in the topic.
This is an art stream.
Season 1 of Unobscured launched last week on October 3rd and will run weekly through the rest of the year. And this season is all about the Salem witch trials. You can hear the trailer and find links to subscribe in your favorite app over at historyunobscured.com. And if you love it, share the show with a friend, and then leave a review over on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe today. That's historyunobscured.com. This episode was also made possible by Fracture. Fracture frees your photos from the digital ether and brings them to life in the real world with beautiful, frameless glass prints. And Lore listeners can receive a discount of 15% off your first order over at fractureme.com/lore.
Oh.
For the Halloween season, though, we're doing something special. Fracture has a contest for Lore listeners. Between now and November 1st, post a photo that you've taken that's inspired by a favorite Lore episode or one that fits the spirit of Lore. Then, post it on Instagram with the hashtag #LoreMoments and tag the user FractureMe. Doing this will enter your photo for a chance to win a $250 Fracture gift card and the World of Lore book trilogy in signed hardcover from me. For official rules and more information, visit fractureme.com/lore contest.
Okay, so Copper wants to make this an art stream. I kind of thought that's what this was. Not gonna lie. Oh dear, what did I just hit? Oh, I had the eraser on. Woohoo! Birdie-der. So, I guess my question is, what dictates an art stream and what doesn't? In you guys' eyes. And that's just more from, like, my point of view. Like, I'd like to know so that way I can properly label things, I guess, for you guys. So that way it's like people know, hey, this is a stream of art type thing. Oh dear. Got overzealous there. Oh, encourage others? I mean, yeah, go ahead, guys. Do some doodles. Do some sick dudes. Need to paint her. I feel like I probably should. Kind of avoiding the face. I'm avoiding the hair and the face because the hair is going to be the biggest pain in the butt ever. That is what I am avoiding.
So what are you waiting for? Post your lore-inspired photo today on Instagram with the hashtag #LoreMoments and get 15% off your first purchase from Fracture by visiting fractureme.com/lore and using the offer code LORE15. And finally, this episode was made possible by the good people over at The Great Courses Plus. I like to learn new things, whether it's something fun like photography or more complex like the history of Rome. I'm always hungry to learn more, and my go-to spot for on-demand learning, hands down, is The Great Courses Plus. The Great Courses Plus offers unlimited monthly access
We'll never know what it offers. Apparently, episode has been
access to thousands of lectures in virtually any category, all taught by some of the world's leading professors and experts. And it's easy too. Just pick a course and then watch it on any device, anytime, anywhere. I highly recommend the course called The Black Death, the world's most devastating plague. We live in a culture today that's obsessed with the end of the world tales of apocalyptic sickness. But in the 14th century, Europe lived through exactly that. In just 10 years, it killed over 75 million people. This is a course that will blow your mind. And I've arranged a special offer just for lore listeners. For a limited time only, they're giving lore listeners a full month of unlimited access to all of their lectures for free. But to get this free month, you need to sign up through my special web address. Just visit thegreatcoursesplus.com/lore, create an account, and then pick your first course. Start learning today on your terms. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/lore. Before moving to Portsmouth, Rhode Island, Thomas and Rebecca had owned a popular inn and tavern in Boston. Thomas was actually one of the earliest settlers of the city, arriving there in 1638 from England. But in 1643, they packed up and left town due to some tense religious infighting that was taking place. Technically, Thomas was what they called an antinomian, but what's important to know is that as a result of this infighting, Thomas and others who agreed with him all headed south to escape. He and Rebecca packed up their lives and started over in their new home on a peninsula of land along New York's East River. Today, the area is known as the Bronx, but back then it was forest and farmland, and Thomas Cornell's original 4-mile tract of land is known today as Classen Point. But his time in the Bronx was brief. A year after they arrived, conflict with the local Native American tribe forced Thomas and his family to head back north, where they settled in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. That was 1644. By 1655, though, Thomas had passed away, leaving Rebecca and her son Thomas Jr. to fend for themselves. And they did well. Thomas Sr. had been very well connected, and their Boston inn had earned them a good amount of money. Most of the kids had grown up and left the house, but Thomas Jr., who was their oldest, had stuck around, along with his own wife and children, to help manage the house. That's when things fell apart. On the night of February 8th of 1673, a lot of things happened. Rebecca stayed in the sitting room to smoke her pipe while the rest of the family ate in the dining room. A short while later, Thomas sent his son Edward to check on her, but he became distracted by one of the family dogs that bolted out of the room. It was Thomas who came into the sitting room next, and when he did, he found his mother on the floor. She was dead, and her body was covered in burns from head to toe. A later inspection by the local physician tried to put a tidy bow on an unfortunate event. Rebecca Cornell had most likely fallen asleep, dropped her lit pipe in her lap, and burned to death. It was resolution, but it was also short-lived. Just 4 days after her death, Rebecca's brother John went to the authorities with a story. He'd recently had a vivid dream in which his sister was standing beside his bed, her body covered in flames. In the dream, John claims that she looked at him and cried out that someone had burnt her with fire. That was it. No actual proof, no physical evidence, just an old man's dream. And yet somehow that was enough to cause the physician to take another look at Rebecca's body. What he found was a wound in her stomach that was unrelated to the fire, causing the authorities to make a leap in logic that even Spring Hill Jack would be proud of. Thomas Cornell had killed his mother.
Hey, thank you, Sasha,
the trial was
$5.
Character witnesses were brought in who claimed that there was no love between Thomas and his mother. His Uncle John's dream was admitted as official evidence, and Thomas was sentenced to death. Unlike the Russell Colvin case, there was no miraculous reappearance of his mother to save him. Thomas was hanged a short while later, and all because a few people had a bad opinion of him. Well, and that dream, of course. I have no pithy ending for you today. The trial of Thomas Cornell Jr. was an insult to the justice system we place our trust in. But even though his life was taken, His family line continued, and it's amazing just how
pressure
well
put
known
on?
his family has
I
become.
do. You. I
Yes,
turned you
Cornell
off.
University was founded by one of his descendants,
Why?
Ezra Cornell. Others include one of the signers of the
Why
Declaration
so
of
dang
Independence,
much?
a Revolutionary War general, Amelia Earhart, Bill Gates, and Presidents Jimmy Carter and Richard Nixon. Oh, and Lizzie Borden, a young woman thought by many to have used an axe to murder her mother and father. But that's a story for another time. Perhaps there really is a lesson here for us. You never know what people are capable of. This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mankey, with research by Marsat Crockett and music by Chad Lawson. I make 2 other podcasts that I think you'll love, Cabinet of Curiosities and Unobscured, and both are available everywhere you download podcasts, and each of them is another slice of the weird and dark underbelly of history, written and hosted by me. Lore exists outside this podcast too. There's a Lore book series in bookstores all around the country and online, and a Lore television show on Amazon Prime. The 2nd season arrives on October 19th, and if you want a little more lore in your life, those are all good things to be looking for. You can always learn more about everything going on over in one central place, theworldoflore.com/now. And if you're a social media person, you can follow the show on your favorite network, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. It doesn't matter. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and click that follow button. And be sure to say hello when you do. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening. In a lot of ways, it's just one more beautiful European setting. The land is covered in lush green trees. A 12th century bell tower hovers above a sprawling complex of ruined buildings, and it has the manicured coastline and man-made seawalls that you might expect from a city on the northeastern coast of Italy. But that beauty hides a darker past. Thousands of plague victims are buried beneath those idyllic green fields. That manicured coastline is actually part of an 18th century fort where hundreds of French soldiers were brought ashore and slaughtered. And those old ruins jutting up from the trees are all that remain of an early 20th century asylum for the mentally ill. You'll never accidentally stumble into this ancient town, though, because it's an island, Poveglia Island to be specific, and only the people who want to go there ever do. Located just 2 miles south of the grand city of Venice, Poveglia is an abandoned time capsule of pain and suffering, one that illustrates the true power of islands. Unlike a metropolis like London or Los Angeles, there's a limit to how far an island can spread out over time. Those shorelines act like a sort of wall, trapping whatever happens there inside. Sure, they might offer more privacy or safety, but as far back as we can remember, communities have been using islands to contain their diseased and undesirables. Places like Alcatraz and Rikers Island are infamous
I
homes
think I'm
to
making it
brutal
look more like a
prisons.
painting than
St.
a
Helena in the South Atlantic was used by the British as the home in exile of Napoleon Bonaparte. Whenever humans encounter a problem, the instinct has always been to bundle it up and lock it away, even if that thing is a human life. But just because you can lock something away doesn't mean it's gone. The tragedy and pain that follows humanity always tends to leave a mark. Of course, we try to hide it, but it's always there if you know where to look, even if that mark is on an island. So come ashore with me if you dare. There's something I want to show you. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. In the early 1600s, Europeans were obsessed with the idea of a northwest passage that cut through the northern parts of North America, giving them easy access to the wealth that could be found in the Orient. They were positive this passage existed, too. One French explorer by the name of Jean Nicolet actually had a robe made out of Chinese fabric that had been purchased from silk traders in Europe. So when he sailed through the waterways that led him to Green Bay in 1634, he brought that robe along with him so that he could look presentable when he stood on the shores of China. This passion for finding the Northwest Passage drove the French to explore much of the area that is now the border between the United States and Canada. Much of that territory is connected by waterways and lakes, making it possible for ships to sail in from the east. Jean Nicolet is famous for being the first European to set foot in Wisconsin, but he was also the first to set eyes on something else: an island. It's not a large island, less than 4 square miles, in fact, but he had to pass it on his way to what would someday become Wisconsin. You've all seen a map of Michigan before, right? It's an oddly shaped state with 2 large areas broken up by water. The lower peninsula looks like a mitten. Hold your left hand up, palm away, and fingers together, and you'll get the idea. Across the tip of those fingers stretches the upper peninsula, running roughly east to west. Between them, though, right in that narrow gap between the tip of the mitten and the peninsula above it, sits an island. Jean Nicolet didn't stop there, but he made note of it on his way by. A few decades later, a Jesuit priest chose it as the perfect spot to build a mission, which he called Saint Ignace. The trouble was, very few people actually lived on the island. That was by choice, too. Obviously, the Europeans weren't the first humans in the area. Long before Jean Nicolet arrived, the Great Lakes area was home to the native inhabitants of the region. The Ojibwe tribe of Native Americans and their ancestors had lived there for hundreds of years, at least as far back as the 12th century. They used this small island as a gathering place for the tribes of the area, and as a burial ground for their dead leaders. They referred to the island as Michilimackinac, a word that means big turtle. It's an allusion to the larger Algonquin mythology that tells the story of the entire world being crafted on the back of a great turtle. By doing this, the Ojibwe were declaring this island to be sacred and different from the rest of their territory. It was special, but at some point around the time the Europeans arrived, the native tribes abandoned it. Those early French explorers took the island's name and shortened it. Michilimackinac became Mackinac, and it's been called that ever since. Over the centuries that followed, the island played host to a number of new inhabitants, each with their own purpose. Through the late 17th and early 18th centuries, it served as a hub for the fur trade, and then became British property following the conclusion of the French and Indian War. They were the ones to build the first fort there on the island, Fort Mackinac. It never saw action, and once the Revolutionary War was over, the British handed control of the island to the Americans. They took it back during the War of 1812, building a second fort there known as Fort George, but returned the island to the Americans just 3 years later. In honor of Major Andrew Holmes, who died leading the final attack on the British there, Fort George was renamed Fort Holmes. It still bears his name today. After the American Civil War, a large portion of Mackinac Island became a national park, the second in American history after Yellowstone. And that seemed to act like a beacon, drawing tourists from all over. With visitors came money, and with money came growth. The wealthy elite built extravagant vacation homes along the coastline, while railroad companies built public resorts and hotels. It was moving into the future, full speed ahead. Well, almost. You see, right around the turn of the century, there was a bustling industry of horse-drawn carriages that transported tourists around the island. In 1896, sensing a threat from the newly arrived horseless carriages, otherwise known as automobiles, the carriage drivers managed to get their motorized competitors banned from the island, and it's still in effect today. While it might seem like Mackinac Island has transformed itself from an abandoned frontier camp into a safe destination for families looking for a nice getaway, all of that polish and shine hides a collection of dark shadows. Over the centuries, events have taken place there that most people would like to forget, and there's a good reason why. Wherever humans settle down, they leave their own special mark, a horrible mixture of tragedy and pain. It's easy to assume that such a small island couldn't possibly contain enough tragedy to fill the storybooks. Like I said earlier, Mackinac Island has less than 4 square miles of land. But that's not how darkness works. Wherever people go, the shadows seem to follow. Death has always been a part of life on Mackinac Island. From its earliest days centuries ago as a burial ground for the most revered and sacred of the Ojibwe leaders, to its time as the centerpiece of conflict between the British and the French, this tiny island has seen it all. If the stories are true, that even includes the execution of witches. The legend says that in the late 1700s, the community that grew up around the military fortifications there included at least one brothel. We don't know exactly who made the accusations, but at some point people became upset at the presence of these women. They viewed them as temptresses, luring the noble men of Mackinac Island against their will into illicit activities. True to 18th century form, 7 of these women were arrested and accused of witchcraft. Then they were subjected to the same sort of trial so many others had been in the centuries before. They were each bound securely to a large stone and then dropped into the deep waters of a lagoon on the southeastern tip of the island. If they floated, they would be executed as witches. If they drowned, well, they would still die, but with their name cleared. That somehow made it better in their eyes, despite the complete lack of common sense. Regardless, all 7 women were said to have perished that day, giving the locals a new name for that lagoon. Even today, it's still referred to as the Drowning Pool. In 1860, the post hospital was built on the island to treat the soldiers stationed there. While a lot of the care was focused on the typical things you might expect to find in any hospital, there were also records of deadly outbreaks of disease like typhoid fever and tuberculosis. And the suffering wasn't limited to the soldiers either. Their families often found themselves needing the same medical care, and records show that death didn't discriminate between any of them. Most of the suffering to take place on the island, however, seems to have involved the 2 separate military bases. In Fort Mackinac, the older of the 2 forts, there's a legend about the death of at least one prisoner in a dungeon referred to as the Black Hole. A murder took place in 1828 in the fort's mess hall when a private named James Brown shot another man in the heat of an argument. Brown claimed it was an accident all the way to the gallows, but in the end, he was hanged for the crime, the only hanging on record on Mackinac Island. A year later, an incident occurred that left its own mark on Fort Mackinac. A dozen or so soldiers had gathered outside on Christmas night when their commanding officer, Lieutenant Ephraim Smith, discovered one of the men had brought alcohol into the fort. Known for his quick temper and taste for violence, Smith proceeded to beat the young soldier in front of the others. Now, maybe it was the Christmas spirit, or perhaps they had just reached their limits of patience with Smith. Whatever the reason, all of the other men jumped to Brown's defense, pulling him away and then giving Smith a taste of his own violent ways. When another officer arrived to help, Smith ran away like a coward, and then made a list of all the men who had attacked him. He managed to have 6 of the men sentenced to hard labor for their actions. Others, though, he tracked down one by one, delivering severe beatings to them in retribution.
Well, I
As a
jumped in on
result,
a pleasant
Smith
moment.
was court-martialed and discharged. One final tale from Mackinaw's history might just be the most powerful example of darkness contained in a small space. In 1823, a reverend named William Ferry arrived on the island with his wife Amanda. They came with a mission to care for the growing population of orphan children that seemed to have slipped through the cracks of society there. Most of them were of mixed descent, with European and Native American parents, which somehow made them undesirable to the community. So Reverend Ferry built a boarding school called the Mission House and brought as many of these orphan children as he could under his roof. A few years later, though, an outbreak of tuberculosis put the school in a panic. Back then, they still didn't know how to properly care for those who had contracted the disease, so the most common solution was simply to isolate them. According to the story, Reverend Ferry and his wife locked dozens of children in the dark, damp basement. Maybe he was hoping they would get better, but he was more than likely just trying to save the ones who were not yet sick. As a result, many of the isolated children died there. Perhaps it was the rumors of this tragedy, or the pain of knowing he played a pivotal role in the deaths of so many children. But by 1837, Reverend Ferry had closed the school's doors for good, and then moved away. But not everything can be forgotten. In fact, the buildings on Mackinac Island with the darkest stories turn out to be the most difficult to avoid. You see, every year, hundreds of thousands of tourists flock to the island for a chance to get away. They bring their children, their luggage, and their walking shoes, and then stay at one of the island's many resorts or hotels. They aren't alone, though, because that dark past is right there, waiting for them. The shadows might have checked in a long time ago, but they've never really checked out. It's a tale almost as old as time. A building or location plays host to so much tragedy and suffering that for centuries afterwards, people who visit that location claim to experience echoes of the past. Some people see or hear things, while others just sort of have a feeling about it, as if they aren't alone, even when they are. But that's the trouble with Mackinac Island. So much bad stuff has happened there that it's almost impossible to find a building there that doesn't have a story or two to tell. Take the drowning pool, for example. Visitors there have seen shadows drift up from the water, while others have heard the sound of large stones being dropped in. Stones, perhaps, like the ones used to weigh down a witch. Fort Mackinac has become a popular tourist destination, but visitors there have seen much more than historical exhibits and guided tours of the old building. Down in the old dungeon, people stopping by the black hole have reported cold spots and unusual balls of light. On the nearby rifle range, the ghost of Private James Brown has been seen by multiple people. How they know it's him, though, I'm really not sure. Like I mentioned earlier, though, it's in the most public places that the majority of these experiences have taken place. In the places where visitors feel the most safe, where they let down their guard. Right in the very same buildings they unpack, settle in, and spend the night. Mackinac Island has a lot of hotels and inns, and inside them are just as many unusual stories. One of the popular places to stay is called the Inn at Stonecliff. It's one of those picturesque buildings at the top of the cliffs overlooking the water, and because of the view, it tends to be a popular wedding destination. But visitors there have seen more than formal attire and flower arrangements. Local legend says that long ago, a woman traveled to the island to marry her true love, one of the British soldiers stationed there. Sadly, he's said to have tragically died before their wedding day, and now her ghost wanders around the inn at Stonecliff, doing her best to disrupt the joyful celebrations
I hate this
there.
so much.
The three-story Pine Cottage is a large bed and breakfast that plays host to its own dark story in the form of a brutal murder that took place there in the 1940s.
Like stone.
2 decades later, the building was purchased by a man named Bob Huey,
And I know I haven't
and from the very beginning
yet,
of
but
his
it doesn't
time there,
just-
the past did its best to make itself known. Over the years that followed, he and his wife witnessed everything imaginable, from a floating, disembodied torso to shadowy figures that would stand over their bed at night. But if you ask around the island, most of the locals will point you to one place in particular that is renowned for its unexplained activity.
I put that on the reflection layer that I was
It's a
going to
massive
mess
structure
with later.
deserving of that name,
Ah,
with the longest
nuts.
front porch in the world at nearly 700 feet
Well,
and close to 400
that's
guest
why
rooms. There's a
I don't do
theater,
this.
a tea garden, and casino there. Notable guests at the Grand Hotel over the years have included 5 U.S. presidents, 1 Russian dictator, countless entertainment stars, and even the well-traveled author Mark Twain. Thomas Edison also stayed there, and it was outside on the massive front porch of the hotel that the first public demonstration of his phonograph took place. Like I said, this place is grand. But there are darker stories. One legend says that during the construction of the hotel in 1886, workers digging the foundation uncovered a number of Native American burial sites. But rather than move the remains to a new location, the builders simply poured concrete over the graves and moved on. It's a mistake that, according to some, invited more than just guests to the hotel. Visitors have frequently reported seeing a woman in the area used by staff as a living space. She's always dressed in clothing from the late 1800s, and while she sometimes has interactions with the employees, no one has ever felt threatened by her. Others have claimed to see a man in a top hat in the bar on the 2nd floor. He's always spotted beside the piano, but after a second glance, he vanishes, leaving behind the distinct smell of his cigar. The most frightening story, though, took place in the hotel's theater.
I've never been good with statues.
Years ago, 2 employees of the hotel were alone on the stage one night,
been good at making
cleaning up
freaking
after
statues.
a performance or event of some kind.
Doing
But with all of the
statues.
guests finally off to their rooms, the vibrant energy of the theater had been replaced with silence. The 2 men were working beside each other when one of them was overcome with the feeling of being watched.
I hate
Glancing
them.
up, he looked toward the back of the stage and noticed something odd. There were shadows everywhere, as you might expect for a theater at night, but hidden among them was something else. I've seen it described as a black mass, as if a dark cloud had gathered together into one
The next problem is I have to do her eyes, which are a
and
pain
at the
in
center of this
butt.
shadowy form, the man reported there were 2 red eyes. He froze. His mind tried to process what his eyes were seeing, looking for some logical explanation that would wash away the fear that was quickly creeping over him. But before he could rationalize away the dark shape and glowing red eyes, the mysterious form began to move toward him. A moment later, it collided with him,
And then I have to do
knocking
her
him
hair,
backwards
which
off
I'm
the stage
dreading
to
her
the main
hair.
floor below. According to the
Because
story,
I want
he awoke
to...
in a hospital bed
Oops,
2
well,
days
I don't know
later.
where I'm going.
He never set foot
Because I have
in
to
the
make
Grand
it look
Hotel
like
again.
this. Out of this, and I'm like... Why? I don't wanna...
Mackinac Island is one of those places that defies logic. At first blush, it seems like nothing more than a tiny island far up north between Michigan's 2 separate peninsulas, almost out of the way and forgettable. On the other hand, though, so much has happened there to keep it alive and active, and not all of it has been positive. Everywhere you go on the island, it seems there's something else beneath the surface. Sure, the hotels and tourist attractions are nice, and the absence of automobiles lends a sort of old-world charm to the place. But you can't help notice the shadows, too. It's almost as if the modern version of Mackinac is nothing more than a shiny veneer that hides a rotten foundation. From the darkest corners of Fort Mackinac to the bright halls of the Grand Hotel, countless visitors each year have seen the cracks in that pretty facade.
Oh, I bet you didn't say
Whether
them,
or not you
'cause
believe
you're a
in
jerk.
ghosts, Mackinac Island is haunted by the past. That includes the places that are off limits to tourists. Remember the old mission house, that boarding school for Native American children I mentioned a while ago? After changing hands and functions a number of times over the years, the mission house now acts as a dormitory for the seasonal workers who take care of Mackinac State Park, which means it's off limits to most people. That doesn't mean there isn't darkness there. It's just that you and I will probably never experience it for ourselves. But of course, stories have a way of leaking out, don't they? It's said that many of the people who have stayed there over the years have seen dark shapes moving through the halls of the lower levels. It's the sort of thing that's usually caught in the corners of your peripheral vision, just out of reach. Whenever people have tried to get a better look at them, though, they vanish into the walls. Others have heard the sounds of distant footsteps and creaking floorboards.
Yeah, that's
objects being dropped
I know
in the
doing
rooms
that.
above them, and the occasional sound of strange voices from empty parts of the
I know that
building.
I need to do that.
Alarm clocks have a tendency to go off on their own at times no one was expecting. Despite the multitude of reports that would seem to hint at something nefarious and evil, the unusual activity in the mission house seems to have been limited to things we might think of as pranks, which actually makes a lot of sense when you look at the pattern people have noticed between them all.
Here we go.
According to everyone who has seen them, all of these shadowy figures have one very specific thing in common. They're small, like children. Hey there! I hope you've enjoyed this guided tour through one of America's most haunted resort towns. Depending on your worldview, there's a lot to love about Mackinac Island, or to be afraid of. But I'm not done just yet. Stick around after this short sponsor break to hear one last tale of tragedy and loss. I know you're going to love it. This episode of Lore was made possible by all of you amazing listeners and by Casper. The Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. Each Casper combines multiple supportive memory foams for a quality sleep surface with the right amounts of both sink and bounce. And it's breathable too, which helps you sleep cool and regulate your body temp throughout the night. The end result is the best night of sleep I've ever had. Every Casper arrives in this insanely small "how did they do that" box. After the easy unpacking process, I laid right down on the mattress in the middle of the day, and it felt amazing. It was a revolutionary experience. The Casper is also designed, developed, and assembled right here in America, and I'm not alone in my love for Casper. With over 20,000 reviews with an average of 4.8 stars, it's quickly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. You can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night risk-free Sleep On It trial. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up for free and refund you everything. They even have free shipping in the US and Canada. I'm not sure you can get more risk-free than that. Start sleeping ahead of the curve with Casper. Get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/lore and using the promo code LORE at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. That's casper.com/lore, offer code LORE. This episode was also made possible by Squarespace. I'll be the first to admit that I have a very weird job. I tell bizarre stories for a living, and it takes a lot of time to do it right. So everything else on my list, making changes to my website or adding items to the Lore shop, all of it needs to be incredibly simple, which is why I use Squarespace.
Go figure.
With Squarespace, you can create beautiful websites to show off your artwork or publish a blog or sell your digital and physical products or even just promote your business. The Lore website has been powered by Squarespace since the very beginning, over 2.5 years, and I can't imagine doing it any other way. Between their beautifully designed templates, the powerful e-commerce features, free hosting, and award-winning 24/7 customer support, Squarespace has everything I need to run a professional website without making that my profession. Get started today for free. Just visit squarespace.com/lore to start your free trial website. When you're ready to launch, be sure to use the offer code LORE at checkout to save 10%. Squarespace, build something beautiful. And finally, this episode was made possible by the good people over at HelloFresh. HelloFresh is the meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers your favorite meals, so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. Each HelloFresh meal is delivered right to your door in a recyclable, insulated package. Inside, the pre-measured ingredients are in handy labeled meal kits, so you know exactly what goes where. And that means there's no need to be nervous. You can be completely confident when you cook with HelloFresh because everything is outlined on pictured step-by-step instruction cards. HelloFresh offers 3 types of meals: classic, veggie, and family. Each recipe takes about 30 minutes to make and saves you the time you would have spent planning and shopping for groceries, so you can get back to doing the things you really love to do. And they're delicious too. My current favorite is their meatloaf balsamico with sweet potato mash and green beans. It was quick and easy to prepare, delicious to eat, and left me feeling like a pro. And trust me, if I can make it, anyone can. Get started cooking smarter today. For $30 off your first week of HelloFresh, visit hellofresh.com/lore30 and enter the promo code lore30 at checkout. That's hellofresh.com/lore30, offer code lore30. If you ever decide to travel to Mackinac Island for a little vacation time, there are a lot of places you can stay, and I've covered a few of them today. One I haven't mentioned yet, however, is the Mission Point Resort. Mission Point gets its name from the old Jesuit mission that was built there in 1671. If you look at a map of the island, there's a whole southeastern corner called Mission Point, and it's right there that you'll find Mission Point Resort. What you might not know is that before they functioned as a resort, many of the buildings were part of a complex built in the 1950s by a religious group known as the Moral Rearmament. A decade later, the buildings were turned into Mackinac College. They changed hands a few more times before finally becoming part of the Mission Point Resort in 1972. The resort inherited a lot more than just buildings, though. With them came a dark tale, one that has its roots in the resort's days as a college campus. According to the story, a young man made a very public marriage proposal to his girlfriend, but she turned him down. Devastated, the student rushed off into the woods between the school and the cliff that overlooks the water, where he used a gun to kill himself. They say his body was found 6 months later. The years since had been filled with stories of a ghost that most locals have taken to calling Harvey. Whether or not that was the real name of the student is a mystery. But what we do know is that multiple people have had unusual encounters with something in and around the modern-day resort. Voices in the dark, the feeling of being touched by something invisible, lights that turn on in the middle of the night, or furniture that seems to rearrange itself. Guests in the resort have even reported items missing from their locked luggage, only to find them hidden elsewhere in their room later. It all feels like a lot of pranks, something college students are sometimes known for. Perhaps Harvey is just a bit more playful than most ghosts. But there are also darker rumors. One state police officer told a reporter shortly after the student's death that the circumstances were more than a bit suspicious. First, no gun was ever found at the crime scene. And sure, perhaps someone stumbled upon it and kept it for themselves. But that would also mean that they found the young man's body and simply ignored it. The other odd detail is more intriguing because it points to a very different story than the official explanation of a desperate suicide. When the medical examiners finally had a chance to study the young man's body, they found something shocking. There were 2 bullet wounds, not one. This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mahnke, with research help from Marset Crockett and music by Chad Lawson. I make another podcast called Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, and I think you'd enjoy it. It's a twice-weekly podcast that explores some of the most bizarre events, objects, and people in history. Each episode is a bite-sized collection of 2 short tales that show you just how unexplainable our world really is. Learn more about it over at curiositiespodcast.com. Lore exists outside this podcast as well. There's a book series in bookstores around the country and online, and the Amazon Prime television show is out there for Prime members. Check them out if you want more lore in your life. And you can always learn more about everything going on over in one central place, theworldoflore.com/now. And finally, you can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and click that follow button. When you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening. He was a 34-year-old Scottish soldier, but his adventures had taken him all over South and Central America, where he'd become friends with King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito Coast, and this ruler had gifted him with a kingdom of his own. In the summer of 1821, Gregor MacGregor traveled to England to get help. He said his kingdom was rich with resources. The rivers teemed with gold, and the soil was so fertile that farmers could bring in multiple harvests each year. It was beautiful and exotic, and bigger than Wales. He just needed investors to help him develop those resources, and settlers to make it happen. And people signed up. In September of 1822, 7 ships left for the kingdom of Poyas. There were hundreds of settlers on board, and hundreds of thousands of pounds in MacGregor's pocket. But when they arrived 2 months later, they found nothing that MacGregor had promised them. There was no one waiting for them, no buildings, no crops, not even a port for their ships. Hundreds of settlers got off the ships and tried to make the best of it, but 2/3 of them died in the process. Eventually, a passing ship saw the survivors and rescued them, but MacGregor escaped to France. He had never been who he claimed to be, and when he got caught, he ran. Humans are idealistic. We look for the best in the people around us, and are quick to trust most of those we encounter. Perhaps this is by design. We're creatures of community, after all. Isolation is something we try to avoid, aiming instead for the opposite. We join clubs, go to concerts, and build relationships. We seem ready and willing to let down our guard. But history should serve as a warning against too much trust. Flipping through those dusty pages, we're confronted with tale after tale of people who were just a bit too trusting, and the price they paid for that mistake. Because not everyone is who they appear to be. Sometimes they are much, much worse. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. They called them praying towns. They were an invention of a man named John Eliot, who was a Puritan missionary to the Native Americans in the 1640s. Eliot had seen some success in converting these original inhabitants of New England into Christians, but wanted them to have a place to start fresh. So towns were built for them. Praying towns. It was, of course, a convenient idea. By converting the Native Americans to Christianity and moving them off their ancestral land and into small reservation-like communities, the English settlers achieved 2 goals at once. They subdued their rivals without violence, and they freed up valuable land that they'd been trying to get at for years. Over a dozen of these communities were set up across Massachusetts and Connecticut. But when King Philip's War broke out in 1675, most of that system just sort of fell apart. Looking back, it's easy to see how these praying towns became a model for things to come. We had wanted the land, and so we took it, forcing the people who had owned it for centuries to go live in special places we'd built for them. The idea would return years later. Obviously, the colonies would grow and spread, and eventually become the foundation of a new nation, the United States of America. We matured. We expanded, and eventually fell into war with ourselves. But when the Civil War was over in 1865, we went back to expanding, and that led us west, into lands that already had people living in them. That same offer went out to the Native Americans of the West. Assimilate or get out of the way. To help them, new reservations were set up to receive them. They might have been less religious than the praying towns of old New England, but they served the same purpose, to remove the Native Americans so white settlers could take their land. The Osage people felt the full brunt of that policy. Out in the area they had called home for centuries, what is today southern Kansas, the white settlers were beginning to flood in. During the first half of the 19th century, their control over their homelands began to crumble, An 1808 treaty gave the U.S. government over 52 million acres, and another treaty in 1870 had the rest of it sold off, and the Osage moved south to Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. The settlers immediately flooded in. One of the newly opened areas in Kansas was Labette County, tucked down in the southeastern corner of the state. Shortly after the removal of the Osage, a number of European families moved into the area along the old Osage Trail. It had once been a migration trail for buffalo, but had become one of the most commonly used passages by white settlers headed west. A lot of those early settlers were Dutch and German. They were looking for land to farm and space to raise their family, and Labette County had all of that. So when John and his son rode into town in 1870,
Well, I think, Copper, what I want to do, because ultimately what I have to do is I have to take this statue, turn it in, basically make this. But the good news is I can draw the actual background. I'm using that as a reference photo for what I want to make. But the problem is I have to make a realistic looking statue. I suck at making realistic things. I'm not good at it. I'm good at making cartoons. Tell me, make that a cartoon statue. Awesome, let's do it. Tell me, make it a realistic statue. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I know how to. The problem is, I can't get the look quite right because I'm so, like, it's just not a thing I think about. I haven't seen a realistic, like, a real statue in forever. Like, I've never been anywhere to look at statues. I don't know what I'm looking for. So, essentially, we started out with something that looked like this. I can't show you the whole image, but I can show you this. And basically, we had to turn it into a statue. And what I want to do is I want to make it kind of made out of this same material that these things are made out of. I don't know what kind of stone that is. I think it's limestone, to be honest. Don't know for sure. But regardless, so I was kind of looking at different stony textures and whatnot to do, but I didn't want to use, like, a lot of people are using marble, and I didn't want to use marble because I don't like, I mean, marble's just too perfect at times. I don't like it. I don't like marble. Marble's too scary. Marble's scary because it's so perfect. Yeah. And so I wanted to do something that kind of looked like it had a little bit of weather to it, kind of looked like it had been there for a bit. And so that's the reason I chose. Doggone it. Okay, I'm gonna move you up here because I instinctively go towards that. Also, I'm sad because now I lost my darn Halloween thing. Poo. I think I did. Maybe not. I think I did. Pretty sure I lost it. When is this? Oh. I'm pretty sure I lost it. Oh yeah, Bendy and the Ink Machine came out. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, methinks I lost my darn Halloween logo. No, wait, I've got it. It's in here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. Okay, cool. Never mind. I don't need to worry about it. What? Bendy? Bendy's trash? Oh no. Oh no. Oh, Bendy Boo. No. No. Oh no, that makes me not want to play it even more. Yeah, anyway. not a bad ending, like a poorly anyway. Kind of seemed rushed from the demand. Yeah, I can see that. I can see how, because I mean, like, originally the game was not going to be like the game. I don't think the dev it's like the Five Nights at Freddy's thing. Like, the dev did not intend for it to be this big, and then lo and behold, oh snap, I've made a thing that's gigantic and everyone loves it. Oh no, what do? I don't want to disappoint them. I could see how that gets, like, I can see how, like, that can be a tad intimidating. Like, I can see it. Yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's, like, the dev, like, toasted. He was good at that. Like, I was shocked at how, like, guy was good. Guy knew what he was doing. Which is sad, honestly, because I like Bendy and the Ink Machine more than I do Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, I'm not trying to say fans of FNAF are wrong. But FNAF has never been my game. FNAF has never been my game. The second chapter of Bendy, I hate, because it's like, you have to hide in horror and all that, and I don't want to do all that. I'm sick and tired of doing it. I'm glad they didn't do it in, like, the third chapter. Because, like, I would have been like, I don't know if I want to continue this. Or was it the fourth chapter? It was one of the chapters. I don't remember. Which was sad because, like, the Boris thing, which I think was the last chapter, like, the Boris thing was, like, really good. I was like, oh, that's like a cool twist. How are you gonna wrap it up? I don't know. I don't know. I don't like spooks. I mean, I do, but I don't. Also, I have a Friday Night Frights that is just gone. Like, I've got it, but I didn't have enough time to turn it into an episode. I've got the video. I just haven't had time to edit it. So, do you guys want me to post that, like, sometime this weekend, maybe? I don't know. I've been so busy, and I just didn't have time to make it into a video. Do you guys want to see it, or should I just scrap the thing? Because it's not spooky. It's not spooky month anymore. At like midnight tonight. And there's no heckin' way I'm gonna be able to get that out. Alrighty, Andalusia. See you later, my dude. I'm taking like a short, like, just intermission while I fester about this stupid thing. I hate it. I'm just taking a quick little break. What's this other tab here? Oh, okay, that was my background. Oh no, like, we're not. Oh, give or take 1 to 20 minutes. But yeah, what do you guys think about, like, me uploading that last Friday Night Frights? Do you want to see it or nah? Because I've also got this other game that's coming out, or that came out today, and I really wanted it. What was it called? I think it was Deathmark. Yeah, it was Deathmark. But, like, I want to do that for Spoopy Boopy Day, but then I was like, oh, I've got this homework that I need done, and so I didn't have time to do it. What do you guys think? You want to see this? What do you want to make? I mean, I was thinking of just doing like a kind of this sort of texture. I know it's not got a texture to it, but like, it's just kind of the I like the idea of this, of making this thing look like it belonged there. And I know I have to do discoloration and all that. I still have to do that. I just haven't done it yet. But I figured that kind of giving it this subtle, kind of like you can just barely see the texture, but it's still there. Kind of like this, where it's like you can see bits of the texture and whatnot to it. And like I said, I think once I add the discoloration, it'll look a lot better. I just don't. I'm never happy with my darn work, and I'm not happy with this. I've got a freaking 100 in the class. It's not like I'm failing. It's just like, perfectionism! Which is my main problem, but everything. Just because I'm like, I want it to be perfect! It's not perfect, it's not good enough! And so then I proceed to just run myself into the ground. I really want to get this game. Because, like, it's a dungeon crawler, but it's a horror game? And I'm like, how does that work? Because, like, as far as I'm aware, it's not technically an RPG. But it just looks wicked cool. I'm like, what the heck is with... Like, what's the heck with this kid? What's wrong with it? And then what's this guy's problem? What's with his face? Because, like, supposedly the story behind this, or the story of this game, is, like, there's, like, once you're marked for death, you basically die some way. And you have to go inside this house, and you figure out what's going on. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Also, when I saw this, I was like, I like this. I want to know what the heck's going on here. Yeah, no, I'm never happy with anything I do artistically. Like I did... Can I preview that? Awesome. Okay, ignore the beak. It wasn't finished. He wouldn't let me finish it! So I was like, because he was like, you got like 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, let's do this! I wanted to make myself a Thunderbird. And so I started, and he was like, cool, awesome, that looks great! Turn it in! I'm like, but it's not done! It's not perfect yet! He's like, it's good enough, turn it in, 100. It's not 100, it's not done! You don't understand, teacher! And then there was, which one was it? Was it this one, or? No, that was the unfinished one. Probably delete that. Move to trash. And there was this one. I was so upset about this. I was like, it's disgusting! Because we were supposed to make a chimera. And so what I did is I'm still, at the time, like, real hyped about Fallout 76, and, like, all the cryptoids and whatnot that are in that game. Fun fact, also, in yesterday's beta that I didn't do a stream of because I was just too tired. I played like an hour of it. I didn't have time. But, in that beta, I found the Mothman again! He was terrifying! Again! And also, I found the Wendigo. In fact, my base camp is literally a step away from the Wendigo's cave, and I was like, oh no! Oh no! And then the game crashed, and I was like, I knew I'd break this game. I knew. You said break it early, Bethesda. I didn't disappoint. Literally, it broke so bad, the game hard crashed my Xbox. And on top of that, like, beforehand, I knew something was wrong because I could not use any crafting stations whatsoever. Like, none of them. I was like, huh, this is a problem. I'll ignore it. I don't need to craft things. I wanted to cook some stuff, but I'll be like, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Then, like, as I was walking away from my camp, I'm like, okay, I'm going over here. And then just suddenly, like, menus start popping up. I'm like, oh no, oh no, the crafting has come back to haunt me. And so I just kept hitting B and B and B. I'm like, okay, get out of my face. Get out of my face. Okay, maybe the crafting's fixed. I'm gonna go back to my camp and go grab, like, you know, craft my food and stuff, because I'm getting kind of hungry. And so I walk back all the way back to my camp, and then I go to I sit down at a cooking pot, because I'm like, okay, cool. Time to cook, Jesse. And crash. Like, and I'm not talking like, oh, it just kind of, oh, poof, I'm gone. No, I get a blaring, like, bah! I'm like, oh no. Oh, it begins. Oh no. And like everything freezes and then just I'm like, okay. I guess that's enough Fallout 76 for one day. And granted, it was like 5 minutes before the beta was closing anyway, so I was like, I'm not gonna get back on and stuff. Fun fact though, I did find out, because I got, you know how I had my power armor, during the last stream, I found out after my battery died, which, fun fact, Bethesda decided to not let my battery die. I don't know how they did it, but apparently, like, they set me back to a point where my battery was full again, which is odd, because, like, they spawned me back at the golf course where we'd left off, and at that time, my battery, I knew, was, like, at 50%. And, like, when I spawned back in, I'm like, I have 100% battery. What the heck's going on here? Weird. Okay, whatever. I'll keep roaming around my power armor. And, eventually I got it down to where it was dead. It was gonna die. And I was like, okay, well, guess it's time to part with my power armor, because I can't figure out how to store the darn thing. And so I put up my camp, and I'm like, okay, maybe if I pop the camp, it'll save the thing as an object in the camp, and I can just keep it. Because, like, I was kind of afraid, like, if I just abandon this somewhere, it's just, someone's just gonna come get it, whatever. What I found out is not only can someone not take your power armor, because nobody can, like, get in it for some reason, I don't know why. Like, I was very confused, because, I'd left my power armor at my camp, and I was playing with one of my Xbox friends. I think their name was Zazzle or something like that. And, he tries to go in my power armor, and he's like, I can't get in your power armor, dude. I'm like, huh, that's odd. Well, it's not going anywhere, the battery's dead, so, I mean, have fun. And, then, I get a little notification at the bottom of my screen, like, your power armor is gonna despawn in, like, 10 seconds. I'm like, huh. Okay, so I assume, like, oh, okay, it goes back to where I originally found it, since I don't technically have a power armor station to dock it at. Oh, that's kind of lame. But okay, that's whatever. I guess, you know, at the state of having power armor, you probably should have a power armor station by then. So, okay, fine. So I let it despawn, I keep working, and then I go in my inventory, in the base's inventory, I mean, and I found my power armor there. I'm like, huh, well, okay then, I guess that power armor is mine now. Awesome, I just need to find some power cores. So yeah, apparently, power armor just sticks with you. It's yours once you find it. Which is really nice, actually, because that means early in the game, I have power armor now. And, I can craft that thing up as I go. Or as I level up and stuff. It'll be nice. But, yeah. That's pretty much it. I mean, I'm doing pretty alright. In 76. I won't be streaming tomorrow, because, obviously, I have class tomorrow, so... It is tomorrow. Yeah, it's tomorrow. And so I won't have time to stream anything. Which is unfortunate. But at the same time, I mean... And what really sucks is I think that's the longest beta period. And I'm kind of like, really, guys? Although they did extend the latest, or the last day of the beta, I think. Because apparently... the PC version of Fallout 76 had a massive bug that deleted the whole game from people's computers, and I was like, that's great. That's just great. Oh, Bethesda, I love you so, but oh my goodness, are you derpy. And yeah, so that happened. Like, it just the whole 50 gig thing was gone. I haven't downloaded the beta on my PC because I really haven't really seen a point of doing that, because I'm like, I've got the beta on my Xbox already. I really don't need it on the PC because it's the same experience. And honestly, like, I wouldn't be like, I'd be able to record the game, but I wouldn't be able to stream it just because of the CPU like gap of like, oh, this is a graphic heavy intensive game, it's gonna run like poop while I'm trying to stream it. And so, you know, I've come up with a plan. Me and my buddy have actually come up with a plan here, 476, where we're going to stream it a lot, but once they release private beta or private servers and maybe even mod support, we're going to release a never before done cinematic style story, kind of similar to the Storyteller, or I mean, yeah, the Storyteller's the one I can think of the most of, where I'm gonna just basically write the entire thing and write a journey for a character. And we'll do cinematic stuff if I can get console commands on PC. I don't know if they'll unlock those with private servers or what, but I'm hoping they do, because then I can do cinematic stuff. I'll let you play test it. You're the magic game breaker, and you are the only one who can manage to break it. You're darn right I am! I hold on to that title very, very good. I've got to, I've got to do a... Oh, I forgot. I actually am a QA tester for one game. I can't talk about it, but I am a QA tester for one game because someone was like, this guy seems to break a lot of things. Hey, how would you like to break this thing? I mean, I don't know, guys. Like, I don't think you understand how my magic works. I can't, like, be told to break something, because then it just doesn't happen. But if I'm unintentionally, like, playing through a game, and I'm like, oh, cool, I'm gonna do this. I broke it. Oh, I broke it bad. Oh, no. Oopsie. They were just like, yeah, just do that. Do it. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So, yeah, long story short, I break things. And not in the fun way. Not in the fun way in the least. Okie dokie, well, I better get back to work. I don't want to. I'm tired. Like, working all day and then doing... I don't wanna. Don't wanna work. I wanna go to bed. Die a little. And I do both. I should probably check my inbox real quick. Yeah. Okay, once I clean out my inbox for a second, I will get back to work. Oh, right, I have to... I forgot I had to reset my password for something. Alright. Eh. Ugh. I had the most delightful pumpkin spice latte at a small cafe. It was great. They even like I don't know if they do this for every customer, but I specifically asked, like, do you have anything seasonal? Because, like, I like Halloween. Halloween's my favorite holiday. You're a white girl now. You're darn right I am! Am I a pretty white girl? No, I know. But, hear me out. I was wanting something seasonal, because I'd already went to Starbucks the other day, and I got their witch's brew, and I'm like, I love seasonal stuff. Like, I can't find freaking Halloween Captain Crunch. I'm like, where the heck is this Halloween Captain Crunch? It's my favorite cereal. I know it's just Captain Crunch, just with different shapes, but I swear it makes it taste better, because it's spooky. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find it. The closest I got was spooky Fruit Loops, and I was like, I don't want Fruit Loops. If I wanted loops of fruit, I'd go get fruit and make loops out of it. I don't need that. I want Captain Crunch. I want my mouth to be cut up. Couldn't get it. I also haven't found Christmas Crunch. I'm kind of upset about that one, because that's my favorite cereal of all time. It doesn't taste any different, but you're darn right I love it. Christmas time, I am scouring all the grocery stores for it. Anyway, back to my latte story. So, I asked the brewer of things to be like, hey, you got anything, like seasonal? Because, like, in my mind, I love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. I always would make, like, weird, interesting things. Like, I want to make, like, vampire blood, zombie brains, mummy gauze, and all this weird drinks and whatnot that I've got in my noodle. And lo and behold, he's like, well, we don't have anything spooky, but, we do have pumpkin spice lattes. And I was like, that's not what I want, but, man, give it to me. Fine, whatever. I want, it's cold. I want something to drink that's hot. I usually get a London Fog. So, I was like, whatever. Let's do it. Let's do it. And, he brings me my latte. And lo and behold, granted, I don't know if he does this for everybody, but I'm hoping he doesn't, because I asked specifically for spooky things. He made a little foam, like froth, into a witch's hat. And I was like, it's so cute! Like, here, I think I've got a picture. Because I am the basic of basic white girls now. Yeah, here we go. Okay. I don't think it's gonna... I don't think the camera's gonna like it. No, the camera does not like it. You can kinda see it. Sort of. Not really. Hey, get closer. Hey! There we go. It's a little witch's hat, I think. I don't know. It may not be a witch's hat. It may have just been like, oh, the foam just does that. But I like to believe that it's a witch's hat. Because I said so. I willed it, therefore it is. Who the heck sent me things? Who the heck is this? Huh. Huh. Okay, so this probably isn't appropriate to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know what? No, I'm going to post on Discord. Because I want to say it, because it's hilarious. But at the same time, I feel like it might not be the most appropriate of things. Anyway. Inappropriate Santos sending me messages. Which, haha, it's funny because he's inappropriate. Okay. I need to make... Go down. And then I need to make... Round brush. Bring you down. Grab my tablet. Okay. Oh, jinkies, that's too big. Yeah, that doesn't look good at all. Maybe if we do a small hole. Let's give her a good old stud. Good old stud. And then we'll say... Good old stud! It's not what I wanted to do. I probably need to paint her darn ears. Which is gonna suck. I don't want to. I don't want to.
They purchased 160 acres of land to call home, and another tract of land to act as a buffer. They didn't want to see their neighbors, apparently. John Sr. and John Jr. got right to work. They built a cabin just a few yards off the Osage Trail, right at the start of a wide valley, which gave them commanding views in all directions. They could see travelers from a great distance, but their neighbors were out of sight, and that was just fine by John and his son. That was October of 1870. Nearly a year later, the rest of John's family arrived by wagon. His wife and daughter had been waiting for the men to get settled, and now they could all be together again. John's wife, Elvira, and his daughter, Kate, broke ground on a large vegetable garden on the north side of the house, and even planted some apple trees there. Whether it had been their intention all along or just an idea inspired by the highway outside, they also set up the front half of their cabin as a sort of general store for travelers. They used the canvas cover from their wagon as a curtain that divided the large one-room house and added some sleeping space off to the side for those rare times when a guest would stay with them. The back half was hidden away for their own personal use. They did slow, steady business, but not everything was idyllic. As the county slowly filled in with new settlers, the community that grew up around them began to buzz with rumors. There was something odd about John's family that rubbed everyone else the wrong way. As the events of the coming months were about to reveal, there was a good reason why. Not everyone who checked in at their makeshift hotel checked out the following morning.
Bum bum bum.
There were a lot of rumors about John's family, and to be honest, it was probably their fault. When they moved there, they were one of 5 families to settle at the same time, and all of them were spiritualists. For some, that meant they simply believed in the main tenets of spirituality, that the spirits of the dead existed and could communicate with the living. For John's family, though, it went deeper. His daughter Kate, it turns out, was an amateur medium. She passed out flyers that marketed her services to the locals, a mixture of spiritual healing and what appears to be German-American powwowing, something more commonly found in Pennsylvania and Europe. She was known to sell spells, usually a script that the buyer could read aloud when they needed help. But activities like this also earned her a reputation as a witch.
Oops.
Once, to test this local theory, a boy was said to have placed a sharp nail on Kate's chair, causing her to cry out when she sat on it. I'm not really sure what they were trying to prove, though, because all Kate did was jump up and scream in pain. She wasn't the only member of the family with a reputation, though. Her parents were looked upon as rude and unfriendly, but there are good reasons why. Both of them spoke very little English around other people, preferring to stick with their native German. John was said to be short and stout with a full, bushy beard, making him appear to be very unapproachable. Kate and her brother John Jr.
Why Photoshop can you not have unlimited undos? You have it on literally every other program! I've literally used Premiere and done something goofed up, and I went back the entire video after 3 hours of editing!
To laugh out loud when no one was speaking to him, and had a personality that seemed to put people off.
I hate
then again,
everything
that was a good
about
description
this.
of all of them. The family just had a way of unsettling people. The worst rumors, however, weren't about their personalities. No, it seems that a number of travelers had begun to go missing in late 1871, and people were starting to wonder. I guess I'm just going to make
the best of this
situation. Granted, it was a dangerous area, and the 1870s was a dangerous time to be traveling out west. People went missing all the time. I don't think I'm going to be able to, though. Accidents could happen, and bandits were a common problem. But travelers on the Osage Trail had a few things in common. They were often in the middle of a very long journey. They had family somewhere, either waiting for them at the end of the trip or back home in the eastern states. And those family members expected silence for a very long time. A lot of them also carried large amounts of cash with them because they planned to start a new life when they reached wherever they were going. By early 1873, as many as 10 people had been reported missing, and their loved ones were starting to look for them. The most prominent of those disappearances was a man named Dr. William York. Oddly, he was actually a local man from the nearby town of Independence, in fact.
Okay, I
who was
wonder,
looking
could I
into
use
yet
spot
another
healing
missing
brush?
person.
Where are you?
York's neighbor back in Independence, a man named George
maybe.
Wonker, had headed east with his daughter, Mary Ann, in the winter of 1872, but they never returned. York waited for months before packing his bags and heading out to see if he could find them. He went as far as Fort Scott, 70 miles northeast of his home, where his brother, Colonel Edward York, was stationed.
I salvaged a bit of it.
Then he left for home and
Vanished
vanished a short while later.
Some more.
That seems to have been enough for the people of the community. In April of 1873, over 75 men from Labette County gathered in the local schoolhouse for a meeting. They agreed that every single farm should be searched. John Sr. and John Jr. were there.
And by fixed it, I mean I made it look less worse.
Most of the meeting. The search would have begun that very day if a spell of bad weather hadn't rolled into town. But when people finally did arrive to inspect John Sr.'s farm on March 28th of 1873,
tweeted me.
It wasn't a group of locals. No, it was a
Am I
dozen
a pretty
strangers
white girl?
led by Colonel Edward York, the brother of the missing physician. He'd been following his brother's trail south from Fort Scott, and all of the clues had led them right there, to John Bender's general store. And
I made it look less worse. This is what I
Johnson
do.
Told them that William York had indeed passed through.
Make the
but
best
he
of
had
a
done
bad
nothing more than eat
situation.
A meal before leaving an hour later. He offered the men new ideas, though. Perhaps York had been murdered by a Native American, or had been set upon by bandits. If they wanted, he told them he'd be happy to help them drag the nearby creek to see if York's body was in there. Kate offered a different option. For just $500, she would contact the spirit world and get the definitive answer for Edward York. It was a price tag worth $10,000 today, and Colonel York scoffed at it. Instead, he turned his horse around and led his men back out of town, frustrated and defeated. But the community was still on edge. A woman had recently been chased off the Bender property by John Sr.'s wife, Elvira, and they say she'd been holding a knife and a pistol when she did it. It wasn't until 3 days after Colonel York's visit, however, that two brothers passed by the Bender farm and discovered something that spurred the whole town into action. Their only hope was that it wasn't too late. They were just doing their job. That's what Billy Toll and his brother told the town when they reported what they found. They'd been driving their cattle down the Osage Trail and were passing the Bender farm when Billy glanced over and noticed that the farm animals there were unfed and abandoned. Billy stopped and approached the house, but everything seemed empty, as if all life had left the structure. Peering inside, he noticed the place was in disarray. It almost looked like someone had packed up and left as quickly as possible, leaving most of their world behind. So Billy headed to town and told the trustee, who called for an immediate search party. When they converged on the Bender farm, it looked as if the entire town had turned up. There were reportedly hundreds of neighbors and townsfolk there, all ready and willing to help search the property for evidence or clues that hinted at the truth behind all the missing people. One of the men who showed up to help that day was none other than Colonel Edward York. He and the others spread out across the farm, while others entered the house to search inside. Everything seemed normal for a long while, too. Sure, their wagon was gone, as were all of their personal belongings, but there didn't seem to be any sign of foul play inside the house. I don't know how that changed, to be honest. Maybe someone noticed scratch marks on a particular spot on the wood floor. Perhaps one of the people heard the buzz of flies somewhere nearby. Obviously, something tipped them off. We're just not sure what that something was. But it led them to a trap door. Beneath that door was the cabin's cellar. It was dark and wet and smelled horribly. And to a group of farmers who spent their lives slaughtering livestock and cleaning up the mess, it was a familiar smell. Rancid, rotten blood. And after bringing in a lantern and lowering someone down into the cellar, they confirmed what their noses had already told them. But there were no bodies. Yes, the dirt floor of the cellar was soaked with congealed blood. And yes, it wouldn't have made sense for a farmer to butcher all of his animals in the cellar beneath their living space. But without any other evidence, there was still no way to prove that the blood hinted at something nefarious. As the story goes, after searching the property for a long time and coming up empty-handed, everyone took a break. Colonel York walked back over to his wagon and took a seat up top. Maybe he had some food up there, or water. But it was while he was higher up than everyone else that he glanced out toward the area of the farm where the orchard had been planted, and noticed something odd. There were lumps in the soil beneath them. Long, human-sized lumps. After York pointed them out to the rest of the search party, shovels were brought in to unearth whatever lay beneath the surface. Everyone held their breath as the first mound of soil was pushed aside to reveal the face of a dead man. No one knew who he was, but it didn't make the moment any less somber for all of them. The second body to be uncovered was William York. The colonel spent a moment standing over his brother's corpse before returning to his wagon. A moment later, he rode off toward town. After that, 9 more bodies were unearthed, bringing the total that day to 11, which included William York's missing neighbor, George Lonker, and his daughter, Mary Ann. Each body had been stripped of all valuables, and most of them showed signs of blunt force trauma to the skull. Most of the men agreed that the weapon had been some kind of large hammer, and all of it begged for justice. There were murderers on the run, and the people of the town wanted to find them. What they found later that day was the Bender's wagon, empty and abandoned near the town of Thayer, about 20 miles northwest of the farm. Oddly, there were bullet holes in the side of it, and a shotgun had been left on the seat as if it had been fired and then dropped. There was no blood, though, or any other clue that might hint at why the Benders abandoned their wagon. Had they been attacked or killed? Or had they fled? The story spread, of course. It was a tale of murder and violence, and those stories were just as popular back then as they are now. This one also had the added texture of Kate Bender's spiritualist activities and rumored witchcraft. In fact, during the exploration of the farm, some of the men had discovered what appeared to be zodiac symbols scratched into the dirt above the graves. It was enough to get people whispering about occult activities and satanic murders. Communities began searching for the missing killers. The governor of Kansas offered a reward to anyone who could bring them in, dead or alive. Wanted posters seemed to plaster the walls of every public building in the southern part of the state. But it was all in vain. The Benders, you see, would never be found. Now, I think it's fair to say that most of us want to trust the people around us. It might not be something that we actively think about all the time, but we still do it. Driving down the highway, standing in line at the movie theater, eating at your favorite restaurant, we trust that we will be treated in a way that's normal, safe, and expected. And trust isn't just about people. It can be an emotion we feel towards systems and objects. We trust our mobile phones to work properly and do what we need. We trust that the garbage will get picked up each week. Trust comes to us naturally. Each of the victims was far from home. They were on a journey that took them away from friends and family and put them in a dangerous environment around the clock. No one could pull over and call for help from their wagon in 1871, at least not without shouting, and most of the time, there was no one to hear you if you did. So, stumbling upon a house that claimed to offer supplies, a hot meal, and a place to lay your head, well, that was a welcome sight to every weary traveler who passed by. The Benders knew that people needed to eat and rest, and they used that as bait to lure them into their dark, murderous web. And it worked. Newspapers across the Midwest carried the story after the bodies were discovered. Partly, I'm sure, to see if spreading the word might help them locate the killers, but also because people are curious.
Nice, Sasha!
Remember, this was 20 years before H.H. Holmes would build his murder castle in Chicago. The Benders offered the public something most of them had never seen before. And they wanted to see it, too. Papers from the time reported that thousands of people hopped on their local train and traveled to Kansas to see the Bender farm. When they were finished, they started taking pieces of the house with them as a souvenir. Enough people did this that eventually the Bender house just sort of fell apart. And that's not all that fell apart. You see, the family that history has come to remember as the Bloody Benders might not have actually been a family at all. There are a lot of stories, so none of this is definitive, but there's strong evidence to suggest that their name wasn't even Bender. Elvira Bender, from what I can tell, was actually Elmira Meek. She worked her way through a number of husbands before meeting up with the man we know today as John Sr., and it's possible that one of them had the last name of Bender. Speaking of John Sr., his last name was really Flickinger. Still German, of course, but not Bender. Kate was most likely Elmira's real daughter, but her last name was Griffith, taken from her father. John Jr. was John Gebhardt, and there was a lot of talk about him actually being Kate's husband. The entire family, it seems, was a lie, and then they vanished into the Kansas night. It turns out that Colonel York, the brother of one of the victims, had another brother. This man, Alexander York, happened to be a Kansas state senator, and he offered a big reward for their capture. The governor eventually tripled the reward funds to increase incentive, but it still didn't work. No one was able to locate them, no matter how motivated they might have been. Putting myself in the shoes of the travelers who headed west in the early 1870s, it's easy to see why the Benders were so successful at what they did. Everyone who stopped inside their house believed they were safe, that they could trust their hosts. The Benders used trust as a weapon just as skillfully as they swung their heavy hammer and sharp knife. They used it to welcome strangers in, to give them what they needed, and then, when the moment was right, to take it all away. Nearly a century and a half later, we don't know what became of them, but we do know that they left a mark.
Looks awful.
They ended lives, destroyed hope, and tore entire families apart. In the process, they taught us all a painful lesson that goes against every human instinct we possess. Never trust a stranger. You never know who they might really be. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Bloody Benders today. They're a powerful example of just how easy it is for an innocent situation to become horribly dangerous. But not everyone who sat down at their table made their way to the dusty earth beneath their apple trees. Some people, in fact, managed to get away. Stick around after this sponsor break to hear all about it. This episode of Lore was made possible by all of you amazing listeners and by Casper. The Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. Each Casper combines multiple supportive memory foams for a quality sleep surface with just the right amounts of both sink and bounce. And it's breathable too, which helps you sleep cool and regulate your body temp throughout the night. The end result is the best night of sleep I have ever had. Every Casper arrives in an insanely small, how did they do that box? After the easy unpacking process, my kids got to town playing with the box, and I laid down on the mattress in the middle of the day. and I'm going to tell you, it was a revolutionary experience. The Casper is designed, developed, and assembled right here in America, and I'm not alone in my love for Casper. With over 20,000 reviews with an average rating of 4.8 stars, it is quickly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. You can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night risk-free Sleep On It trial. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up for free and refund you everything. They even have free shipping in the US and Canada, so I'm not sure you can get more risk-free than that. Start sleeping ahead of the curve with Casper. Get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/lore and using the promo code LORE at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. That's casper.com/lore. Offer code LORE. This episode was also made possible by RX Bar. I sit on my chair most days, writing my fingers off for hours, and it's easy to forget to do essential things like drink water, stand up, and eat. Thankfully, that's where RX Bars have saved the day. The RX Bar was created in 2013 because they couldn't find a protein bar without artificial ingredients, fillers, and preservatives. Their goal was to create clean, simple protein bars without the BS, and they did it. Each RX bar has no added sugar, no dairy, no soy, no gluten, no artificial coloring, and they prove that real ingredients actually taste really good. They're the perfect snack for your afternoon slump, your weekend bike ride, or to toss in your bag for your next flight. The RX bar comes in 14 delicious flavor varieties, including coconut chocolate, peanut butter chocolate, and maple sea salt, as well as many great seasonal flavors. My current favorite is their legendary and delicious coffee chocolate. It's a little slice of heaven in the middle of my day. Another new addition to the RX Bar lineup is their RX Nut Butter, made with the same core ingredients and come in 3 great flavors: peanut butter, honey cinnamon peanut butter, and vanilla almond butter. It's a great snack on pretzels or fruit, but honestly, it's just as good out of the convenient pouch while you're on the go. For 25% off your first order, plus free shipping, visit rxbar.com/lore and enter the promo code LORE at checkout. That's rxbar.com/lore, promo code LORE. And finally, this episode was made possible by my good friends over at Squarespace. I'll be the first to admit that I have a very weird job. I tell bizarre stories for a living, and it takes a lot of time to do it right. So everything else that's on my list, like making changes to my website or adding items to the Lore shop, all of it needs to be incredibly simple, which is why I use Squarespace. With Squarespace, you can create beautiful websites to show off your artwork, publish a blog, sell your digital and physical goods, or even promote your business. The Lore website has been powered by Squarespace since the very first day over 3.5 years ago, and I can't imagine doing it any other way. Between their beautifully designed templates, powerful e-commerce features, free hosting, and award-winning 24/7 customer support, Squarespace has everything that I need to run a professional website without making that my profession. Get started today for free. Just visit squarespace.com/lore to start your free trial website. When you're ready to launch, be sure to use the offer code LORE at checkout to save 10%. Squarespace. Build something beautiful. To understand how the Benders worked, you have to understand how their home was laid out. As I mentioned earlier, they used the canvas cover from their old wagon to divide their living space into 2 sections. The front half was where their meager little general store was located, no more than a counter with a few essential supplies. There was also a small table and a cot in one corner. Behind the curtain was where the 4 of them slept, but that curtain was incredibly close to the back of one of the chairs at the table. So close that if you were to lean back, your head might brush against it, and anyone standing behind it would be able to see your silhouette. It was an easy target for anyone who might be lurking in the back with a heavy hammer to swing. Not everyone who stepped inside the Bender house ended up in the pit below their kitchen, though. One man, William Pickering, claimed that he was welcomed in for a meal by Kate. She guided him to the table, making conversation the entire time, and tried to seat him with his back to the curtain. Pickering noticed that the canvas was filthy and covered in stains, and moved toward a different seat. Kate was said to become irate, and she shouted at him while waving a knife around in the air.
Uh-oh. Methinks something wrong.
The air. It was enough to make anyone uncomfortable, but Pickering had the courage to stand back up and exit the house. He managed to get back on his horse and ride off before the entire family chased him down. Why he didn't head straight to town to report it? Well, that's anyone's guess. Another traveler who escaped death at the hands of the Benders was Catholic priest Father Paul Ponzaleone. He claims to have left before his meal was finished because he noticed Kate whispering behind the curtain with John Sr., who held a large hammer in his hand. It's probably a good thing he did. Those hammers have a way of leaving a mark, metaphorically speaking. Fans of Neil Gaiman might be surprised by some of the details he wove into his novel American Gods. At one point in the story, the main character's shadow visits a clearing in southern Kansas, where he's told about the people who once lived there. They made human sacrifices to an old Slavic god named Chernobog, killing travelers in exchange for power. Their weapon of choice, of course, was the hammer. This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mahnke, with research help from Marset Crockett and music by Chad Lawson. I make another podcast called Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, and I really think that you'd enjoy it. It's a twice-weekly podcast that explores some of the most bizarre events, objects, and people in history. Each episode is a 10-minute bite-sized collection of 2 short tales that show you just how unexplainable our world really is. Lore exists outside this podcast, too. There's a book series in stores around the country and online, with Book 3, Dreadful Places, premiering on October 9th. There's a TV show on Amazon Prime, with Season 2 premiering on October 19th. Check them both out if you want a bit more lore in your life. And you can also learn about everything going on over in one central place, theworldoflore.com/now. And hey, if you're the social media sort of person, you can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and then click that follow button. When you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening.
I have a feeling I'm not going to like this. Wait a minute.
There's nothing like a good thunderstorm. Now, I say that, of course, as someone who grew up in the Midwest. With a flat landscape and open sky, it was possible to see dark storm clouds roll in from a great distance, and they always seemed to put on a show. Charles wasn't born in the Midwest like me, but he had a powerful attraction to the natural world. If it happened, he wanted to document it, and that hunger for knowledge extended to the weather. Unusual storms, extraordinary occurrences, and unexplainable conditions. Stories like that made up the bulk of his first nonfiction work, called The Book of the Damned. Stories like this one. It seems that a storm blew into the Kansas City, Missouri area on July 12th of 1873. The sky became incredibly dark, the sort of dark that makes you think of apocalyptic movies, and then a torrent of rain was unleashed on the city below. Rain and frogs. Living, breathing amphibians that fell from the sky and covered the landscape. Charles went on to build a career out of gathering and sharing these extraordinary tales. And while much of the world has forgotten the name Charles Fort, almost everyone has encountered the term for his particular brand of paranormal research, Fortean.
I hate this.
Even today, we're still left scratching our heads at the wonders of the natural world. There's so much that we know, and yet in the grand scheme of things, we've barely scratched the surface. Charles Fort documented hundreds of cases of unnatural rain, including frogs, but also ants, worms, and even fish. And while we think we know the true reasons behind them, it doesn't change our fascination with it all. The natural world is a mysterious place. That's why we've spent thousands of years studying it. The more we know, the less there is to fear. At least, that's the assumption. The trouble is, our thirst for answers has led us into darker territory, where the natural order of things seems to have broken down. And when the rule book is gone, horrible things can happen. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. Albert was one of those people who refused to fit into a box. Of course, there was a lot about him that made perfect sense. Born in Bavaria in the early 13th century, he entered the Dominican order and began a career in the church, which eventually led to him becoming Bishop of Regensburg. But Albertus Magnus, as he would come to be known, also had interests outside the walls of the church. At some point in his career, he stumbled upon a reference to a lost work by Aristotle, a catalog of gems and stones. To someone like Albertus, who believed that everything should be studied and written down, this loss of knowledge was tragic, so he set about recreating it on his own. It would be called the Book of Minerals, and he gathered his material by traveling all over Germany to visit mines for a first-hand look at how the extraction of gems and valuable ore actually worked. During one of those trips into a German mine, he encountered a rock that completely baffled him. He described it as thin and sharp on one side, almost like an axe. But it's his description of how the rock was formed that is the most interesting aspect of the story. According to him, this was the type of stone that was black or red in color, that falls from the clouds and splits beams and penetrates walls, and is called by the common people a thunder axe. It wasn't a new idea, though. 6 centuries before Albertus, another bishop recorded a similar observation. Isidore of Seville wrote in the early 600s about a stone he called a glossopetra, or literally, a tongue rock. He claimed it fell from the sky during a waning moon, and it was said to possess great power. Magicians, he wrote, suppose that by means of it, the moon can be made to move. Yet another bishop wrote a book about geology in the 1100s. Bishop Marbode of Rennes wrote in his Book of Stone about a rock called Serranius. He claimed it was only found after lightning strikes, and that after falling from the sky like a shooting star, it could be collected and used to protect against future lightning strikes. This idea of a thunderstone that falls from the sky wasn't just limited to the European continent. One of the contemporaries of Albertus Magnus was an English writer known as Bartholomeus Anglicus, literally Bartholomew the Englishman, which is super creative, I know. He wrote in 1240 about how these thunderstones were formed. When it thunders horribly, he wrote, fire lights the air. When clouds smash together, this stone falls. Over the centuries, more and more of these books of stone were written by scholars. One of the longest was written in the late 1400s and is still around today. It's called the Peterborough Lapidary, named for the cathedral where it was discovered, and its focus is on the magical and medicinal properties of rocks. There's a vast array of fantastical objects written about in this book, including stones that aid in divination or serve as a protection against witches. Other stones are said to help people speak to the spirit world, while others give humans power to control demons. And tucked inside all that information is one other stone, known as the Coparius. Coparius is described as a celestial stone that falls to the earth from the heavens above. Like other thunderstones throughout history, this rock was said to protect the owner against all sorts of maladies, including misadventure, lustfulness, and, you guessed it, lightning strikes. Together, all of these writers and their published works on the nature of stones has left us with over 1,000 years of tales about rocks that fall from the sky. It's a classic example of how storytelling can be used to explain the parts of our world that don't seem to fit the known laws of nature. Earth and air, stone and sky. These things are all supposed to stay in their boxes and obey the rules, but the exceptions tell us otherwise. Today we have the benefit of looking back on all those centuries of scholarship with a fresh eye. Our tools are more comprehensive, and our knowledge more expansive.
The problem is there's no good tutorials on this particular way of doing a stone statue, the way he's wanting to do it.
Because just like them, we're
this
simply
isn't the way everyone else does it.
The world's most deeply strange and unsettling events don't just happen without a reason. Something created them, formed them, and dropped them in our laps, so to speak. And that's what makes one particular story so difficult to accept. Because if it is true, it's also terrifying. They called it the Great Island because, well, it was big. Sitting at the mouth of Portsmouth Harbor, where the Piscataqua River divides modern-day Maine from New Hampshire, it was the first thing most travelers would encounter. Whether you were leaving the area to board a ship east, or you were visiting from somewhere else, the Great Island was on the edge between the land and the sea. That's where Richard Chamberlain stopped on his way to England in 1692. Chamberlain had served as the royal secretary of the colony of New Hampshire for a time, but was on his way back to London to report on what he'd learned there. Before boarding a ship for his long transatlantic journey, Chamberlain stayed at the only inn on the island. This inn/tavern was owned and operated by George Walton and was essential to the community. Taverns in the 17th century were a place where you could get food and drink for sure, but they were also a gathering place for the community. Courts would be held in local taverns, and they served as a nexus for the trade in and out of the area. Staying in Walton's tavern wasn't unusual, and Chamberlain never thought twice about it. On Sunday, June 11th of 1682, Chamberlain retired to his room upstairs after a long day of travel, but was awoken a short time later. According to his account, which was published in London in 1698, he was pulled from sleep around 10 p.m. by a loud thumping sound on the outside of the tavern's structure. Unsure of what might have caused such a thunderous noise, he climbed out of his bed and wandered down to the main room below, where he was startled to find Walton and some of his family gathered at the open front door of the tavern. They were looking out into the darkness, whispering among themselves, when Chamberlain approached and asked what all the noise was about. The answer Walton gave him was almost as surprising as the noise. The tavern, he was told, had been pummeled by a shower of stones. Chamberlain stepped forward and peered out through the open door to see for himself, and sure enough, the ground outside was littered with rocks, most of them as large as fists. All of the people gathered there at the door made the same assumption. Someone, or a group of someones, was tossing stones at the tavern. As they were talking about it, though, 2 more stones fell inside the room. Chamberlain saw it happen with his own eyes and said they seemed to fall from the direction of the ceiling rather than a window or the open door. Still, that didn't make sense. So they did what logic told them to do. They closed the door. If the stones were being thrown at them from the outside, shutting the door would put an end to the prank. But it didn't. In fact, it seemed to get worse. Stones smashed through a couple of the windows and fell to the floor. Others seemed to appear from nowhere and knock objects off of shelves. 2 candlesticks toppled off one of the nearby tables, as did a large pewter tankard. Everyone would turn toward a new sound, and as their eyes were taking in the damage, another sound would catch their attention from behind. Over and over again, they did this strange dance, chasing the unexplainable action around the room. At some point, though, Chamberlain convinced Walton and the others to be more scientific about it all. He began to gather the stones and place them on a nearby table, and noticed that as he did that, each of them were hot to the touch, as if they'd recently come out of a fire. After a few hours of constantly dodging the stones and then gathering them up, Chamberlain decided to call it quits and return to bed. But running away wasn't going to spare him from the insanity. Just as he was drifting off to sleep for the second time that night, a fresh round of thumping rattled the side of the tavern.
I got angry, so I started drawing
it sounded
angrily.
as if the new attacks were being aimed directly at his own room. A moment later, a stone that would later prove to weigh over 8 pounds crashed against the door of his room so hard that it forced it open. Alarmed by the noise, Walton and the others rushed upstairs to check on their guest. The stones eventually stopped falling on and in the building that night, but the next few days proved to be just as chaotic. More stones fell on Monday and Tuesday, but then took a break until Saturday when it resumed at full strength. Stones were even falling on farmers outside, and at one point, George Walton himself was pummeled so severely that he received injuries that would plague him for the rest of his life. In the weeks that he stayed at the tavern while waiting for his ship to arrive, Chamberlain recorded more and more showers of stones, sometimes as heavy as 30 pounds. He wasn't the only official witness to the events, though. Other guests at the tavern included Walter Clark, the deputy governor of Rhode Island, and a royal customs officer named Edward Randolph, both of whom attested to the truth of Richard's testimony. Despite the numerous witnesses, though, the events in and around the tavern continued to defy explanation. Were they being thrown by a group of pranksters with incredibly strong arms? Or was it all a hoax put on by George Walton himself? The only thing they knew for sure was that they didn't know anything at all. And that was the most frustrating part. You can't control what you can't understand, and the constant shower of rocks on the area around the tavern was leaving everyone feeling powerless and afraid. But all of that was about to change. You see, George Walton had an idea, and he wanted to test it out. If he was wrong, no harm, no foul. If he was right, though, then they had a bigger problem on their hands. Witchcraft. It was a hunch, really. I mean, how else was George Walton planning to explain it? Stones kept raining down on him, whether he was outside of his tavern in the fields or safely behind closed doors. It was clearly supernatural, and so he wanted to get to the bottom of it, and that began with an experiment. George and his wife Alice began assembling what was known as a witch bottle. It was a device of counter magic, a sort of protective ward against the evil powers of a witch. It involved cooking a handful of bent pins inside a pot of boiling urine and then pouring the mixture into a small glass bottle to be placed beneath the hearth of their home. Except they never got to finish it. The first batch was ruined when a stone flew down the chimney and spilled the pot they were using. The second batch was struck by another stone, this time breaking the handle off and spilling the urine. Their third attempt failed when yet another stone came down the chimney and shattered the pot, spilling the mixture everywhere. For the Waltons, this was confirmation. Clearly, a powerful witch was at work, and they were trying their hardest to prevent resolution. And George knew exactly who that witch was, too. It was his neighbor, Hannah Jones. Hannah was the elderly widow that lived on the property directly next door to the Waltons Tavern, separated by a strip of marshland. As everyone knew, her mother, Jane Walford, had been accused of being a witch back in the 1650s, something that plagued her for years. In fact, Walford had been tried 3 separate times by the people of Great Island, but each time it happened, the courts ruled in her favor. As an aside, I want to add some non-essential details here. Not only did Jane Walford defeat the accusations of her neighbors, but she also countersued a number of them for slander, and she won. Maybe it helped that the Walfords were one of the biggest families on the island, or maybe she was just very good at taking her opponents down. Either way, she rolled right over them each and every time, and I love that about her. Her daughter Hannah had lived with that reputation her entire life, so it's no wonder George Walton cast his net wide enough to reach her property next door. But even though her family's connection to witchcraft was at the top of his list, Walton had another reason to dislike Hannah Jones. It turns out the two of them had been in the middle of a property dispute for 30 years. That strip of marshland between Walton's property and that of Hannah Jones had originally belonged to Hannah's husband. But Walton had this habit of staking claim to land he didn't own, building a house on it, and then suing his neighbors for possession. In 1652, he tried suing Hannah's husband, but lost, and Walton was ordered to remove his fence and hand the land back over. Walton refused, and for the next 3 decades, the neighbors went to court over and over again, each time ending with the defeat of George Walton. At one point, Hannah went into the area between their homes and tore down a section of Walton's fence so her cows could graze in the marshland. The tensions grew off and on this way for years, without ever reaching a compromise or resolution. Now, maybe the courts were just sick and tired of Walton's refusal to budge, or maybe a new generation of judges had a fresh take on the situation. Either way, in 1660, Walton was awarded the land, but only if he paid Hannah for it. It was a court-ordered sale, in a sense, and he was bitter about that. So, too, was Hannah Jones. On Friday, August 3rd of 1682, the gate to the fence that separated Walton's land from another neighbor, John Amazine, mysteriously fell off. Amazine said it fell off so loudly that he heard it from inside his house, as if someone had fired a big gun. The following day, Walton led some farmhands out to repair the gate and discovered that the damage was more extensive than they'd realized. Portions of the fence that divided his land from Hannah's had also been torn down. Furious, Walton and his men got to work on the repairs, but while they were doing so, a shower of stones fell from the sky, pelting them. They ran for cover, but the stones followed them. There must have been a break in the mysterious rain for a little while, though, because at some point the men headed back out to finish the repairs, while other servants began work in the nearby fields. Soon enough, though, the rain returned. The damage was extensive. Stones fell with such force that at least 3 of the sickles used by the servants were broken. One woman was struck nearly 10 times by the falling rocks, while others were injured as well. I get the feeling they bravely plugged away at their work, but I'd imagine it was painfully slow. Over the next couple of weeks, the instances of the stone showers became less and less frequent. By late August, they had slipped into the biggest lull since it had all begun, and it seemed as if the worst was over. Walton's accusations of witchcraft had landed Hannah Jones in court, and his fence was repaired. I think old George was feeling pretty good about himself at that moment. But pride comes before the fall. The fall of stones, that is. In September, George saddled his horse and made his way to the ferry so that he could cross the river and attend the Portsmouth Council's hearing on the witchcraft case. He had to have been smiling, maybe even humming. He'd finally gotten her. The old witch was going to hang. That's when one final shower of stones descended upon him. He continued through it, riding as fast as he could, but the rain of rocks followed him. One of the stones was so large that it struck his head and split his scalp open, covering his face with a wash of thick blood. I'm sure it hurt, but for a man about to step into the courtroom and call his neighbor a witch, it was also a bit of fortuitous physical evidence. Much like his fence, though, everything fell apart for George Walton that day. He entered the hearing, showed the examiners his split skull and bloody face, and explained what had happened. And they shut him down. Hannah Jones never went to trial, and George Walton went home, frustrated and beaten. It never rained stones on Great Island again. I think the story of the stone showers of Great Island is a powerful example of tales that play with our expectations. We expect George Walton to be the victim, and for Hannah Jones, his antagonist, to finally get what's coming to her. But that mold is shattered by the historical context. It turns out that George Walton was, as the historian Emerson Baker calls him, the neighbor from hell. He was a Quaker in the middle of a Puritan community, something that would have been seen as a hindrance to their mission of religious purity. And he was highly litigious too, taking countless people to court over things he honestly had no claim to. This was a guy who was so upset when public roads crossed a portion of his land that he would dig holes in them to make them unusable. He stole from his neighbors and owed large amounts of money to dozens of people on the island. And when he wanted town-owned common land, he would just build a house on it and then take the town to court. He was a stone in the shoe of everyone on Great Island. History, at the basic level, is the story of people and events within a larger context. We can't talk about the American Revolution without discussing colonial taxation, or World War II without World War I. Everything is connected, and no story happens in a vacuum. Most of what we know today about the events on Great Island in 1682 come to us from that observant guest, Richard Chamberlain. 16 years after it all happened, he published a short booklet about it and shared the story with the people of London. But it's important to understand who that audience was by 1698. For decades, the vast majority of people in England were united in their stance against witchcraft. That's why people like the self-appointed witchfinder general Matthew Hopkins was able to travel the countryside and execute alleged witches with such ease. In the middle of the 17th century, that was just the accepted norm. But by the 1690s, all of that had changed. The witch hunt craze was a dying monster. Sure, it kicked and screamed from time to time, but by the early 1700s, it was cold and dead. The 1716 executions of Mary Hicks and her 9-year-old daughter Elizabeth were the last in England, and the Witchcraft Act of 1735 put an end to the criminality of traditional witchcraft. So Richard Chamberlain, as passionate as he was about the diabolical subject of Lithobolia, the stone-throwing devil, was preaching to a very disinterested audience. Maybe he was trying to renew that old hatred, or perhaps he was just a grifter hoping to make a little money off a dying market. Either way, few people were listening, but word did spread. Many months after the Great Island events, stones fell on a family in Hartford, Connecticut. A decade later, the community in Gloucester experienced their own episode of falling rocks. And in the summer of 1692, a woman named Sarah Cole was accused of using witchcraft to shower stones down on the Brown family in the town of Lynn. Cole was mobbed with accusations after that. Neighbors blamed her for everything from illness and supernatural sounds to balls of fire and mysterious animal sightings. As a result, a warrant was issued requiring her to be examined by the authorities. After she was arrested, they transported her to a New England community that was still in awe of the power of witchcraft, still entangled in its own feverish embrace. A community that I'm sure you've heard of before. The Massachusetts town of Salem. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of Lithobolia and the events of Great Island in 1682, but there's so much more to explore. In fact, stones have held a magical power over us for a lot longer than you'd think, and one of my favorite examples of this dates back to our old friend Albertus Magnus and an amazing discovery he made. I'll tell you all about it after this short sponsor break. This episode was made possible by each and every one of you and by Fracture. Fracture wants to change the way you think about printing your photos. Instead of printing on photo paper, Fracture prints directly onto glass, turning your favorite photographs into works of art. And they're absolutely gorgeous too. I've got one of their prints sitting on my desk here, and I absolutely love it. Fractures are so minimal that they look good in any decor, and ordering one is just as simple. Upload your image, place the order, and a few days later you'll have everything you need to display that piece of art, including a wall hanger. Fractures make great gifts, and they're made right here in America, in Gainesville, Florida, in fact, right inside a green and modern carbon-neutral factory, so you can feel good about what you're buying. And right now, Lore listeners can save 15% off their first order by visiting fractureme.com/lore, and then using the offer code LORE15 at checkout. When you do, they're going to ask you how you heard about Fracture, so don't forget to tell them that Lore sent you. Enjoy that 15% off today. That's fractureme.com/lore. Offer code LORE15. This episode was also made possible by Audible. Audible content includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more from the leading audiobook publishers, broadcasters, entertainers, and newspaper publishers. And it's not a rental service either. You own the books you buy and can listen to them on all your devices, including your phone, tablet, or even at home on your Amazon Echo. Each month, members get a credit that's good for any audiobook in the store, regardless of price, and credits roll over if you get too busy and forget to use them. And if you don't like an audiobook, you can exchange it, no questions asked. Start your new membership by sinking your teeth into some scary stories. The second book in my World of Lore series, called Wicked Mortals, is available right now on Audible. It's a collection of all the lore tales, both rare and classic, that cover the evil real-life people whose stories give us nightmares. And Audible is offering Lore listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audible.com/lore and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a free title and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audible.com/lore, or you can text the word lore to 500-500 to get started today. That's audible.com/lore. And finally, this episode was made possible by the good people over at Stamps.com. I know a lot of people who run a side business in their spare time. They work that 9 to 5 and then they come home and make things. I've been there before myself.
Yeah.
It's exciting and fulfilling, but it comes with a lot of challenges, specifically shipping those amazing products that you create and sell. That's why Stamps.com is a lifesaver. It lets you buy and print official U.S. postage right from the comfort of your home or office, using your own computer and printer to do so. Any letter, any package, any class of mail. They'll even send you a digital scale that automatically calculates the exact postage that you'll need. Over 500,000 other businesses already agree with me, because it just makes sense. Stamps.com can save you time and frustration by getting you exactly what you need, when you need it. And Stamps.com is never closed. Get started today. Just visit Stamps.com right now. Click on the microphone you see at the top of the homepage and type in the word lore to start your 4-week trial, plus postage and a digital scale, and all of that without long-term commitments. That's Stamps.com. Offer code LORE. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, Albertus Magnus was an industrious and hands-on scholar. Rather than just building a new book about gems and minerals by talking with other scholars, he chose to travel to various local mines. Seeing his subject firsthand in its natural element gave him a unique perspective on the world of rocks. Once, as the story goes, Albertus was inside one of those mines when his escort handed him a large egg-shaped stone and pointed to a crack along one side. Whether the next step was presented to him by the miner or an invention of his own, we don't know, but Albertus placed the stone down, took a hammer, and then struck it with enough force to break it cleanly open. Inside, he was amazed to see the outline of an animal. Its body was curled up to fit the shape of the stone, but Albertus could clearly see the curve of its spine and the long, elegant bend of its wings. Together with feet that he described as shaped like those of a fowl, it struck the scholar as very bird-like. Except this bird was much larger than he would have expected, and there were details on the skull that didn't fit his understanding of newborn chicks. In fact, he thought of it as a monster, but how it had managed to find its way inside a rock was a mystery to him. The best explanation he could offer was that some life force in the earth had generated life inside a lifeless stone. Trapped inside, the creature clearly died before it could live, and then reverted back to the stone it had come from. Looking back with our modern understanding of the natural world, it's clear that Albertus had discovered a fossil, but simply lacked the understanding to put the pieces together. But that's not the most amazing part of this story, because if his description is any indication, the fossil was definitely not that of a bird. It was a dinosaur. This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mankey, with research by Carl Nellis and music by Chad Lawson. You can find Chad on Spotify by searching Chad Lawson and kicking back and enjoy. I make another podcast called Aaron Mankey's Cabinet of Curiosities, and I think you'd really enjoy it. It's a twice-weekly podcast that explores some of the most bizarre events, objects, and people.
I don't know what I
in
just
history.
made.
Each 10-minute episode is a bite-sized
collection
of two short stories that show you just how unexplainable our world really is. Lore exists outside of this podcast, too. There's a book series from Penguin Random House that's available in bookstores around the country and online, and the third book in the series comes out on October 9th.
I can't make it perfect.
There's an Amazon Prime TV show with the second season premiering on October 19th, and you should check them both out if you want a little bit more lore in your life. And you can always learn about everything going on, new and upcoming, over in one central place, theworldoflore.com/now. Oh, and hey, if you're a social media sort of person, Lore is on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and click that follow button. When you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening.
Tolerance.
The sun above them was hot and bright when the three children wandered off to play in a nearby field. They were siblings, one boy and two girls, the children of a local railroad terrifying in the city of Gloucester, England. The field
it's the
was one of their favorite places to go during the day, but they always returned home by dinner time.
Don't have time for
this. On this particular summer day in 1906,
doggone it,
dinner arrived without the children. Their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, were worried enough to call for the authorities to come help them. Beginning that very night, a search party was formed to locate the missing children.
Maybe if I
step away for
finished their
night of
5
searching
minutes
empty-handed.
and come back to it.
Not a single clue.
I'll be like,
found
oh,
that
I
might
see what
hint
the
at
problem
where
is.
The children had gone, or if they'd been taken by a malicious stranger.
No, because like,
their children,
for instance,
with parents rarely give up hope so quickly.
Because like with the David, for instance, the David actually has a section cut out of stone, like it's a hole. Like this section right here where my mouse is, that's a hole. That's where they put the blacks of your eye, basically. Is they just cut a hole, and sometimes it has like a little divot here. Hang on. because I don't need to see the giant dong. And I get that David is like just this gigantic thing. I get that. So, you know, the hole's like probably about yay big. But it's like I wanted to make that kind of effect. And I get that, you know, they're usually just like circles, like see like this or something else. Not loading now. Well, the internet is not working. Come on, load, please. Load! 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 Come on! How does it take this long? You're fine, I'll switch to frickin' Firefox. Jeez, I mean, I doubt it's gonna be much faster. Oh my gosh, why is everyone call me? Ah, I hate people. Like, you just text me. Is it really that hard? Alright, Evie. Have a good one. Really that freaking hard. To just be like, oh, hey, I'll just text him. No, I have to call him. Why? Like, I don't care about... Ugh. So does calling! Calling, you have to, like, put in your number or go to the contacts. I'm like, come on, people! Like, I don't want to talk. That's one thing, like, I detest. Out of all the things in the world, well, okay, not all the things in the world, but you know what I mean. Like when people are, like, wanting to talk over the phone, it's like, I don't like talking over the phone. I detest talking over the phone. I hate it. I do. Because it's like, I usually don't talk on the phone. I'm usually just like, uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, really? Yeah. It's like, I don't like making conversation like that. That's not how I do conversation. I like to text. I like to be like, okay, da 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 da. I will send you a paragraph rather than talk to you over the phone. Cause like, when I talk to you on the phone, I'm just like, I don't know what to say. I'm just like, I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know. Ah! Heck! Maybe it would look better. Yeah, I think it would look less rapey. If either we took out the irises and... Maybe if we took out the irises in general. Where's my iris layer? If it took it out. And then smudged it, maybe? Kind of give it a... That or maybe... Well, you're not doing anything. Kind of give it a... Maybe a little bit more. About a 30%. Maybe. How about 50? I'm mostly just frustrated at this stupid thing. I'm just like, I can't get it to look right. I hate this. Tell me to make a horse into a goop thing, I'll be on it all day. Done it several times. Freaking tell me make a human into a statue. Oh man, that's when the brakes stop. Yeah. Annoyed. Very annoyed. It's like I can't get it to look right. It doesn't look like a statue to me. And I don't know. Maybe it's just because I haven't seen many statues. It does not look like a statue to me. Looks like disappointment. Wrapped in failure. I can't get it to center! You know, it's fine. It's fine. This just doesn't look like a statue to me. It looks just... It doesn't. Ah. And I get, like, turn on... The hair doesn't even look right. So if we've got a light source right here, then we need to make a light source this to make it look like one giant piece. Where is the hair? Okay, so if I take this. Think with your art brain, Maggie Moo. Think with your art brain. I don't have one. Pretend to think with your art brain. That's not. Okay, fine. Look that. I don't know if I'm doing this, but I'm doing something. I'm doing something, kids. Oh, great. Okay, here goes. Is this what you require, world? Is this what you want from me? I feel like this isn't what it wants. I feel like this is... Oh, haha. Right. I forgot. Wait. The fool. Ah, no. Stop it. Stupid what now? The hairy boy. Did I just freaking do this? I didn't just do that, did I? Like at this point, you know, just take, this could be the base layer. It's got the lighting. Maybe that'll work. Maybe that. What are you doing? Stop it. Go away. I don't know what you're doing. I mean, granted, this is a poop layer. Awful. Awful looking. And takes into account the lighting. Maybe. Fix you back. Need that to do that. And eyedropper this particular one. There I am. First. And grab this. I'll turn the podcast back on. I'm having a brain moment here. Might not be a good brain moment, but it's a brain moment. Shadows, morph them, work with thing you do. I don't know if this is right. I don't know if this will look right. Right now, that feels right. Looks weird. Looks real weird.
They searched the following day, and a third day as well. After that, though, things were beginning to look bleak. On the fourth day, a farmer was plowing a field close to the one the children had been playing in when he noticed something in the ditch along the northeast side. It was the forms of the missing children, laying peacefully in the dirt. But they weren't dead. They were sleeping. After waking them up and taking them home, the children surprised everyone with a shocking story. They had no memory of the past 4 days. Even 40 years later, the son was still unable to offer an answer to the riddle of their disappearance. Things go missing. Whether it's a sock in the dryer, your car keys, or an entire person, every now and then, things just sort of slip through the cracks and vanish. Thankfully, like the children in Gloucester, a lot of those missing things are eventually found. But if we thumb through the pages of history, we'll come face to face with something worse. Something that tugs at our darkest fears and leaves us feeling unsettled. Sometimes people vanish, and they're never seen again. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. Let me just say right from the start that history is so full of disappearances that I'm not going to come anywhere close to discussing all of them. From the legendary 9th Roman Legion and the Roanoke Colony, to the Mary Celeste and Amelia Earhart, the floor of history is so littered with disappearances that it's a miracle none of us trip and hurt ourselves. What's become clear is that the most powerful disappearance stories are the ones that involve people. That family member who's never seen again, or the public figure that seems to vanish into thin air. Lost objects and ancient colonies lack the emotional weight that we feel when a local man goes missing, and that's where I want to focus today. Benjamin Bathurst was born into the upper crust of British society. His father was the Bishop of Norwich. Then after finishing his education, he began work for the crown as a diplomatic envoy. He traveled to Vienna in the spring of 1809 and was part of the group of advisors that helped convince Holy Roman Emperor Francis II to declare war on France. But things didn't work out in the emperor's favor, and Bathurst had to find a way to retreat home to London. He decided that traveling north through French-occupied Germany would be his safest bet. So in November of 1809, he and a friend named Kraus set off toward Hamburg. On the 25th of November, though, their plans fell apart. That was the day they reached the city of Perleberg, just 80 miles from their destination. The two men stopped for an early dinner at the White Swan Inn and had the horses on their carriage changed out. Then, thinking it would be safer for them to travel in the dark of night, Bathurst headed back down to the carriage around sunset to continue the journey. He and Kraus inspected the horses and watched as workers from the inn reloaded their luggage. The two men were just a few feet apart when Bathurst stepped out of view to climb into the carriage, and a moment later, Kraus followed him. When he looked inside it, though, he was shocked to find it empty. Bathurst had vanished. Kraus claims that he searched the entire area around the carriage and even had guards block off the street so they could stop anyone who might have kidnapped his friend. But try as he might, he was never able to find Bathurst. The man had been there one moment, but was gone the next. Decades later, and 600 miles to the west, a group of men were traveling home from the pub at the end of a night of drinking in the Warwickshire town of Leamington Spa. The three men, Barham Wise, Hammerson Burns, and James Warson, were all seated in the same carriage, laughing and trading stories, when Warson made an outrageous claim. He bragged that he was a gifted long-distance runner. He could run for miles and miles without slowing down or tiring, even after a night at the pub. His two friends refused to believe him without a demonstration, so they stopped the carriage and told him to get out. They told Warson to run the rest of the way home, and they would follow behind him to see it with their own eyes. Reluctantly, Warson agreed. Even after all the drinking they'd partaken in back in the pub, Warson put on a powerful show. According to the story, he set a steady pace and began the long run back to their home in Coventry, 10 miles to the north. All the while, Burns and Wise stayed behind him in the carriage, following along from a short distance. A handful of miles into the demonstration, something happened that left Warson's friends stunned and afraid. They were watching Warson run straight down the middle of the country lane, when all of a sudden the man tripped on something they couldn't see. He stumbled, waved his arms in a panic, and then fell to the ground and vanished. When Burns and Wise caught up to the place where Warson had tripped, they expected to find their friend laid out in a ditch. Amazingly, though, there was no sign of him. They searched the sides of the road and called out for Warson to end the practical joke, but no matter how long they stayed there and searched for him, he never turned up. The police were called to help in the search, as you might expect. But according to the story, Burns and Wise never found their friend. He'd tripped over something, then slipped into nothing, and was never heard from again.
Interesting.
He was a rising star in his country's military, and now everyone had gathered in the town square to catch a glimpse of him. He was a man of the people, a newly minted captain, and a knight in France's prestigious Legion of Honor. If ever there was someone deserving of respect, it was him. The trouble was, everyone was gathered to see him branded as a thief, not a hero. You see, he'd arrived in the city of Danzig a few months earlier and had settled in as the guest of a local business owner. We don't know the shop owner's name, but we do know that he dealt in fancy goods, whatever that might mean, and was also in the middle of a bit of a business slump. As such, the man had no employees, so he enlisted the help of this esteemed military guest. It was sometime during his service over those many weeks in the merchant's shop that one of the valuable signet rings went missing. It was small, and the captain was trustworthy, so the merchant assumed it had just been lost under a box or cabinet. It would turn up again, he was sure of it. And it did. Many weeks later, the merchant took a Sunday morning stroll through the city marketplace. While he was there, he bumped into an old friend, and the two men exchanged greetings and a handshake. And that's when the merchant noticed the man's ring. "Where did you get that?" he asked, motioning toward his friend's hand. "This?" the friend said, holding up the ring. "I bought it off a soldier, if you can believe that. It only cost me $5. The merchant proceeded to explain that the ring had once belonged to him, but had gone missing. Putting the pieces together, the two men came to the startling realization that the entire episode had been an act of theft by that well-respected member of the Legion of Honor, Captain Fritz Alsvanger. The events moved quickly after that. The captain was arrested and brought before the governor, where a confession was made. A trial was set up, and Alsvanger was brought before a local general for a court-martial. Finally, a confession was drawn up, and the captain willingly signed it. All that was left was for him to be stripped of his rank and removed from the military, which would happen the following day in front of his entire garrison. The town square filled with thousands of curious onlookers when Alsvanger was led out into the center. His military uniform was stripped of all its markings, badges, and honors, which were then piled together on a cushion and carried away. Women fainted, and fellow soldiers openly wept. The noble life of Captain Fritz Alsvanger had been literally and figuratively dismantled. That's when Alsvanger asked to speak. He turned to the general and then made the most amazing declaration. "I am not Fritz Alsvanger," he said. "I am Diederik, the son of a tradesman from Strasbourg." The crowd was stunned, as was the general. He looked at the man who had just been stripped of his entire military career, paused, and then extended a hand. "Explain yourself," he said. The tale the man began to weave for them was stunning. 3 years prior, he had just completed 7 years as an apprentice to a shoemaker in Strasbourg. Wanting something new for himself, he left the city and joined up with a small group of Romani. After traveling south for some time, they eventually found themselves in the Italian city of L'Aquila. Stopping in a local lemonade shop for a drink, he discovered all of the seats were occupied with military officers, and all of them were watching him intently. Moments later, one of the soldiers stood and approached, and that's when Diederik saw the man's face, and he froze. The two men looked so alike that they could have been twins. They spent some time marveling at this, and when Alsvanger discovered that Diederik was in search of a job, he offered him one. The following day, Diederik became the officer's valet. Life after that was interesting, to say the least. Alsvanger loved to use their near-identical appearance for amusement. Sometimes the two would swap clothing so that Alsvanger could have more fun and enjoy the non-military life, and to give Diederik a taste of a bit more power and admiration. It was an entertaining life, and at least to Diederik, it was a major step up. No longer was he the unemployed former apprentice to a Strasbourg shoemaker. He was valet to a well-known and well-respected lieutenant, and that had changed everything for him. But now, here he was, convicted of a crime that resulted in the utter destruction of another man's reputation. Which begged the obvious question. If Fritz Oswanger wasn't the man standing before them, then where was he? Oswanger, it turns out, was dead. It happened after a long night of drinking. Diederik helped his master home on a cold, wet autumn night, although he practically had to drag him. Oswanger complained of a powerful headache and seemed delirious and unaware of his surroundings. After the officer was safe in bed, the valet gave him a cool drink and then retired to his own room for the night. In the morning, Diederik claims he entered Oswanger's room at the usual hour to prepare a morning drink for him, but found the man to be pale and unmoving. Stepping closer, it became obvious why. Oswanger was dead. Whether it had been some sort of illness or perhaps a heart attack, Diederik didn't know, but he knew he had to act quickly. Before anyone else in the building was awake, he dragged his former master's corpse into his own quarters, where he dressed the man in his clothing. Then he quickly dashed back to Oswanger's bedroom, dressed himself in uniform, and started his day as the other man. After a short while, he faked annoyance at his valet's tardiness and sent someone to fetch him. Naturally, they found him cold and dead. Like Farm Boy taking over the role of the dread Pirate Roberts, Diederik had assumed the life of Fritz Oswanger. He took over every bit of it, from his duties in the military to friendships with the other officers. And thanks to the fact that the two men had been nearly identical in appearance, it worked. Of course, that had been 2 years before his arrest for theft, so the general and governor were intrigued to know what he had been doing all that time. Diederik explained that soon after, he received orders to travel to France, and since that moved him closer to home and farther from the people who had known Oswanger intimately, he jumped at the chance. Along the way, he was even promoted to captain, thanks to his commitment to his role and responsibility as an officer. The only hitch in the entire charade was the visit he paid to his mother. She didn't necessarily suspect him of being an imposter, but she certainly noticed he was much less affectionate toward her. A mother always knows, doesn't she? When they led Diederik away to return to his jail cell, the people gathered around were left in stunned silence. Some even wept at the tragedy of it all. But none of that changed the current charges of theft, to which he had freely admitted guilt. All of the details of his story were sent off to Emperor Napoleon for a decision, and the waiting began. When word arrived, there was good news and bad news. On the positive side, Napoleon didn't believe that Diederik had murdered Oswanger. On the other hand, though, he was still guilty of theft and fraud. According to the story, he was branded as a thief in the area of his back between his shoulder blades, and then locked up in a local prison. The plan was to keep him there for just a short while, and then transport him to another prison in western France where he would work as a slave on board one of the naval ships. Within months of his trial, though, the French Empire began to crumble around them, and as a result, that transfer never happened. By 1814, the city was in the hands of the Prussians, and as they began the task of taking on the duties of running the various branches of government, one of the things they did was review the prison records. As far as I can tell, everything seemed normal and above board, except for one problem. The prisoner listed as Diederik was noted with one simple word: missing. As the story goes, months before the arrival of the Prussians, the guards were escorting a group of prisoners across the open yard of the complex. They were walking in single file, hands chained together, with a longer chain connecting them to each other. And right there, in full view of everyone around him, Diederik began to fade out of sight. That's the story, anyway. And while it sounds like a scene pulled straight out of a Star Trek film, it probably does a lot of what folklore has done for us over the years. It takes a kernel of truth and repackages it for a more entertaining storytelling experience. Looking back, historians think that the more likely reason he was listed as missing was that he somehow managed to escape. Scribbling "escaped" in the margin of the prison logs would have been a lot more embarrassing, so they decided to go with missing. And honestly, all he needed to do was get over the wall. The harbor below the prison would have provided him the perfect place to hide until a ship could carry him away.
Yeah, well,
In a sense, Diederik disappeared the day he swapped clothing with the corpse of Fritz Alsvanger. His old life vanished, while the life of his master continued on with a new actor running the show. And while we'll never know for sure how he disappeared from that prison in Danzig, whether it was some sort of supernatural evaporation or just a good old-fashioned prison break, it's clear that he lived out one of our greatest fears when he did it. He went missing. It's almost terrifying just how easy it is for people to disappear. We go through life thinking of ourselves as so permanent and immovable, and yet, well, we're not. Sometimes life can carry us away, like a river dragging debris toward a new destination. Other times, it's the darker side of humanity that causes those disappearances, such as kidnapping or murder. People vanish, whether we like it or not. Sometimes, though, time reveals the answers. It can be like a strong wind that blows the sand back,
Nice
revealing the
Unity.
truth buried beneath it. Take Benjamin Bathurst, for example. After he disappeared in 1809, odd clues started to turn up. His pants were found in the woods outside of town. They had bullet holes in them, but no blood, and there was a letter to his wife in the pocket. Stranger, a coat that was thought to belong to him was discovered in the private home of an employee of the White Swan Inn where he'd been staying. That might sound like nothing more than a bit of on-the-job theft, but one final piece of information makes me wonder if something more wasn't going on. You see, in 1825, a house in the same town was demolished so that a new one could be built. A previous owner of the house had been yet another employee of the White Swan Inn, but they found something more significant buried in the dirt of the original foundation than a coat. They found a skeleton. Benjamin Bathurst might have disappeared, but at the end we have people to blame for it, not magic. And remember our long-distance runner, James Warson? Well, his story first appeared in a collection of tales published in 1913 by an American writer named Ambrose Bierce. In fact, it was one of many stories he published over the years that involved people who mysteriously disappear. And while that doesn't necessarily mean that Warson's amazing run was entirely fictional, there's no other evidence to prove it wasn't. Ambrose Bierce, if you've never heard of him, was the guy who wrote An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, a story I remember being forced to read in high school. He was born in 1842 and worked as a journalist for a number of years, including for an abolitionist newspaper. Then the Civil War broke out, and he joined the Union Army. After the war was over, he continued his career as a writer. While he was mostly known for his journalism, his fiction helped inspire countless others. H.P. Lovecraft cited Bierce as a catalyst for his own writings, thanks to his many horror-themed short stories, and Hemingway held him in high regard as well. All in all, his writing career was groundbreaking and influential. At the age of 71, Bierce decided to revisit all of his old Civil War battle sites. It was the sort of thing people do when they want to reflect and reminisce. Those few years of military service had become core to who he was, and he wanted to stand in those places one last time. He left Washington, D.C. by train in October of 1913 and began the long, slow journey south and west, stopping at each important site along the way. He wrote letters home and spoke to journalists in various cities he visited. In New Orleans, he told a reporter that he planned to keep traveling south into Mexico, perhaps to join up with Pancho Villa, and the Mexican Revolution. "I like the game," he said. "I like fighting. I want to see it." The old soldier in him must have gotten what he wanted, too. In late December of 1913, he wrote a letter to a friend from the Mexican city of Chihuahua. "As to me,"
I did
he
not
wrote,
know that was a Mexican
"I
city.
leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination." And that was it. Over a century later, historians are still unsure what that new destination might have been, and what transpired along the way. Like so many of his literary characters, Ambrose Bierce slipped out of the world and into the unknown. He vanished and was never heard from again. Tales of disappearing people have a way of unsettling us, whether the cause is mundane or something more unexplainable. And we've explored a number of those today. After this short sponsor break, I want to share one last story with you. This one has the flavor of the remarkable, and while its truth is highly debatable, it's just the right mix of intriguing and entertaining. Stick around to hear it in a moment. This episode of Lore was made possible by each and every one of you and by Wine Access.
Aw, man.
All the best wines have a story behind them, but more often than not, you can't find these amazing handcrafted bottles in your local store. Thankfully, Wine Access is here to change all of that. Wine Access believes that there are wineries out there offering higher quality wine at better prices than you'll find in most stores. For nearly a decade, their team of experts have tasted thousands of bottles from all over the world just to select the very best.
If you do something in Affinity,
and what I love the most about Wine Access is that they share more than just great wines at great prices. They share the stories too. My wife and I enjoyed each of the bottles we ordered, but they were all the more special because of the stories each brand is part of. I really want you to try Wine Access too, so I've arranged to get you an exclusive limited time offer. You can get 20% off these great wines that are already a great value. Consider this your chance to enter a whole new world of amazing wine at an amazing price. This offer is just for a limited time, so order now to get this great 20% off deal. For full details, visit wineaccess.com/lore. What are you waiting for? Go now to wineaccess.com/lore. This episode was also made possible by Squarespace. I will be the first to admit that I have a very bizarre job. I tell weird stories for a living, and it takes a lot of time to do it right. So everything else that's on my list, like making changes to my website or adding items to the Lore shop, all of it needs to be incredibly simple, which is why I use Squarespace. With Squarespace, you can create beautiful websites to show off your artwork, publish a blog, sell your digital and physical products, or even promote your business. The Lore website has been powered by Squarespace since the very beginning, almost 4 years ago, and I can't imagine doing it any other way. Between their beautifully designed templates, powerful e-commerce features, free hosting, and award-winning 24/7 customer support, Squarespace has everything that I need to run a professional website without making that my profession. Get started today for free. Just visit squarespace.com/lore to start your free trial website. When you're ready to launch it, be sure to use the offer code LORE at checkout to save 10%. Squarespace. Build something beautiful. And finally, this episode was made possible by the good people over at HelloFresh. HelloFresh is the meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers your favorite meals so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. Each HelloFresh meal is delivered right to your front door in a recyclable, insulated package. Inside, the pre-measured ingredients are in handy labeled meal kits, so you know exactly what goes where. And that means there's no need to be nervous. You can feel completely confident when you cook with HelloFresh because everything is outlined on pictured step-by-step instruction cards. HelloFresh offers 3 types of meal plans: classic, veggie, and family. Each recipe takes about 30 minutes to make and saves you the time that you would have spent planning and shopping for groceries so that you can get back to doing more of what you really love to do. And they're absolutely delicious too. My current favorite is their hot honey chicken with barbecue roasted potatoes and buttery broccoli. It was quick and easy to prepare, it was delicious to eat, and left me feeling like a pro. And trust me, if I can make it, anyone can. Get started cooking smarter today. For a total of $60 off, that's $20 off your first 3 boxes. Visit HelloFresh.com/lore60 and enter the promo code lore60 at checkout. It's like getting 6 meals for free. That's HelloFresh.com/lore60, offer code lore60. The guard wasn't supposed to be there. It was a hot October afternoon in 1593, and the Viceroy's palace in Mexico City was already staffed with enough watchful eyes. So when one of the men glanced over the wall and saw another soldier standing at the front gate, he sounded the alarm. The man in question was a guard like them, but he was wearing a very different uniform, which meant that he might be the enemy. The captain of the guard brought a few soldiers with him to the front of the palace and then carefully opened the gate. The man outside turned and looked at them with a puzzled expression. "Where am I?" he asked in perfect Spanish. The captain answered him and then inquired about his name and story. The man identified himself as Gil Perez. Until a few minutes before, he had been a guard serving the Spanish colony of Manila, 9,000 miles away in the Philippines. Naturally, the Mexico City guards didn't believe him, most likely laughing at the thought of it, but the man pushed deeper, trying to prove it. "Just last night," he told them, "the governor of Manila was killed by Chinese assassins while our fleet was headed to the Maluku Islands." Remember, though, that this was 1593. There was no internet or radio, let alone a telegraph or mail service. If something had happened 9,000 miles away just hours before, they had absolutely no way of confirming it. Instead, the stranger was thrown into one of the palace's jail cells and left there until a better, more believable story presented itself. And that's where he remained for many long months. The following spring, a package of correspondence arrived from the Philippines. Among the papers inside it was a letter detailing the assassination of the governor, along with the date of his death, October 25th, 1593. Somehow, against all the odds, the stranger had been right. Not knowing what else to do, the Viceroy released Perez, gave him all the supplies that he would need, and then sent him back west, where he was told to catch the next ship bound for Manila. All we can assume is that he made it home safely. As with so many of these tales, there's very little evidence to help us know for sure whether the events really played out this way, or if they've been edited over the centuries to give us a bit more of a thrilling experience. Either way, the tale of Gil Perez highlights one important question we almost never get a chance to answer. When people vanish from our sight, are they gone forever? Or do they simply end up somewhere else, a stranger in a distant land? This episode of Lore was written and produced by me, Aaron Mahnke, with research by Marsat Crockett and music by Chad Lawson. I make another podcast called Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, and I think you'd really enjoy it. It's a twice-weekly podcast that explores some of the most bizarre events, objects, and people in history. Each 10-minute episode is a bite-sized collection of 2 short tales that show you just how unexplainable our world really is. Lore exists outside this podcast, too. There's a book series in...
Alrighty, guys. So, I'd say that's about, well, all the time I have. I'm not happy with the results, but, I mean, there's not much else I can do. So, we're just gonna have to work with what I got. So, anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a fantastic, happy Halloween-y day. I hope you guys that, did go out trick-or-treating or whatever, had a fun time. And I hope you got a lot of good candy. Because that's some good stuff right there. That's good stuff. For those of you that didn't go trick-or-treating and just sat around with me, well, I'm glad you decided to spend your night with me. That's That's a grade A thing in my book. If you want to check out Lore, the podcast we've been listening to for the past almost 4 hours, there's a link in the description down below. I like it. It's good. It's spooky, but also, you know, factual and interesting. So yeah, no, that's that. And yeah, I've been working in Photoshop. If you want to know the software, which I doubt you really need to know the software, but I use Photoshop. Once again, thinking of getting Affinity. Don't know. I just think I think it'd be an interesting software to learn. I've got it on my iPad, but I just don't get a chance to use it much on the iPad, just because I'm always carrying around my laptop that has Photoshop, and I'm like, well, I mean, Photoshop, might as well. And it's something I'm more well versed in than, say, something like Affinity, which, I mean, is still cool. I like Affinity a lot, on at least on the iPad experience, because like it has different personas that you can do, like liquify and all that, and it makes things, and honestly, the liquify tool is really cool on it. I like that. But yeah, no, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a fantastic day. Happy November-ish in like 10 minutes. So yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Bye. Oh, we'll probably do some Fallout on Saturday. Tomorrow I'm not going to be doing anything because I have school until like 11 o'clock at night, and I'm going to be dead tired in the world, so not going to be doing anything tomorrow. Friday, we might do something. I don't know. I might upload that Friday Night Frights that never was. Maybe. Be real tired tomorrow. Anyway, bye!